The old man stood near a tree deep in the forest. A small child sat beside him. He recalls, once his grandfather, who is called the best mage in the world, said that he had reached the peak of his magical skills. The grandfather turned to his grandson, Igni, and asked him to listen carefully. The small child, confused, asked the grandfather what he wanted to tell him. Then the grandfather, with strange eagerness, loudly told Igni that women like power so much so that his shouting scared the child. Later, Igni was riding in a luxurious carriage drawn by two horses. Someone persistently called his name, while Igni sluggishly tried to open his eyes. Suddenly, Igni comes to his senses and fully wakes up. He apologizes to his father. He dozed off during the ride and did not hear him. In response, Igni's father began to scold him and asked when he would finally behave like the eldest son of the Lazarites. He also reminded Igni that today was his distribution ceremony. But suddenly, Igni's brother intervenes in the conversation and defends his brother. Frey asks not to scold him and says that Igni studied until late last night, so he is so sleepy today. The father understands that Frey is defending his brother, but at the same time says, at today's ceremony, they both must be among the light mages to show their seriousness with their entire appearance. He makes the sons understand that everything must be exactly like that, and no other way. The sons agree with their father. They do not want to disappoint him. Igni and Frey arrive at the Soffring ceremony, which takes place among 12-year-olds. It is this ceremony that determines the magical abilities of each child. Igni and Frey belong to the Laser Eye family. They control light with the help of magic. Their grandfather, Cruz, is considered the best mage and quite the handsome man. Igni stood among the other teenagers and waited for the distribution ceremony to begin, but suddenly someone ran headlong up to him. Before Igni can react, a girl named Rosa in a cute simple dress runs up from behind and hugs him tightly. She smiles and asks Igni if he is ready for the ceremony. Rose looks happy, eagerly waiting her turn, supporting her friend with a shout and a radiant smile. Rose is from the Aquamarine family, water mages, and she is Ian's fiancée. Suddenly someone from the crowd shouts that among the children there is already someone with B rank, and this greatly surprises Rose. These words scare her even more. She says that B rank is very cool and confidently states that she is still far from that level. Igni tries to cheer her up and calm her down. He says he is sure they will also achieve a high rank. Suddenly, it is Rose's turn. She is again overwhelmed by terrible nervousness. She trembles and begins to worry endlessly. Rose steps onto the stage in front of a crowd of other teenagers. She approaches the table where a glass sphere stands on a small cushion. They tell her not to worry and just touch the sphere. Gathering her thoughts and calming down, Rose carefully extends her right hand toward the ball and gently covers it with her palm. Suddenly, light begins to seep from the ball, and a magical circle appears around it. One of the ceremony leaders shockingly declares that Rose has S-rank monk magic. People in dark mantles standing in front of the crowd shout, "You see such a mage once in 100 years. They still cannot believe it, but at the same time say they will take care of Rose. She is frightened by the general excitement. Frantic commotion begins in the crowd. Everyone here is excited by what is happening. They move actively and push people around. After Rose, there is the same phrase, and he behaves much more confidently. As soon as he puts his hand on the ball, the armored men declare that he has SS light magic. They also say that there have never been any light mages with such abilities. The whole crowd is stunned. Evan Igni, who begins to worry seeing how much talent his brother has. After this, the dressed man calls the next in line. Now it's Igni's turn. He excitedly raises his hand closer to the glass sphere, thinking he will receive the same incredible abilities as his brother. He is confident about this. After all, he is the eldest son of the Lazarite family. But as soon as he places his hand on the ball, nothing happens. There is no light, nor does a magical circle appear. After a few moments, Igni realized nothing happened. He still kept his hand on the ball, confusedly waiting for something to happen any moment. Igni begins to feel the entire surface of the ball with both hands. The man in the robe loudly calls the name Igni Lazarite. After this, he declares that he has F-rank fire magic. Igni cannot believe what he heard. His face is covered with cold sweat. He does not want to step away from the sphere, does not want to accept such an answer, but the organizers forcibly push him aside and call the next in line. After 2 months, Igni decided to accept his fate. He began studying the basics of fire magic fireballs, but he was extremely bad at them. Full of despair, Igni decided that this was the end. Sitting on the bed in his room, he thought about Rose and how she was doing there. Igni realized they were from completely different ranks. He was a failure, she was an outstanding mage, and there was nothing in common between them anymore. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. From behind it, they announced that Igni's father was calling him. Igni enters his father's office. He was waiting for his son and was clearly not in the best mood. He turns to his son and reminds him, Cruz, his grandfather, was not only the best light mage, but also successful with women. After this, he says that Igni is talentless. His face increasingly fills with hostility, and he says that it is hard to imagine a worse stain on the reputation of their family. Then he offers his son two options. He offers Igni either to stay at home for the rest of his life or to leave their home and renounce the family name. Igni silently listens to his father. His lips tremble as if he is about to cry. Igni clenches his fist, but his hands begin to tremble treacherously. He turns to his father and immediately corrects himself, calling him the head of the Lazarite family. Igni cannot hold back and tears stream down his face. With incredible difficulty, he tells his father that he has decided to leave this house. After that, he silently leaves the office of the head of the Lazarite family. Igni slowly leaves the estate. He does not raise his eyes, he looks down, sadly. Suddenly, Frey, who was standing near the entrance, calls him. Igni does not notice. Frey smiles and says that so much time has passed since they last saw each other. Ian apologizes and replies sadly, he is no longer part of the Lazarite family. Hearing this, a barely noticeable smile appears on Frey's face, and after a moment, he begins to laugh loudly. Without any pity in his voice, Frey says he knew it. Everything would go this way. Igni was always lazy and never cared about studying, while Frey was constantly busy with lessons. He adds that the gods see everything, hinting that Igni deserved such a fate. Ian clearly did not expect such words from his brother, who had always treated him well. He cannot believe that his brother thinks this way about him, so he stammers and asks if Frey really thinks that about him. When he approaches his brother threateningly, the latter asks in response if Igni does not think the same. Frey's smile disappears for a moment. He raises his right hand and says that to Ian he is Master Frey, who calls his brother unworthy. While saying these words, he uses magic and Ian's body instantly falls to the ground. Igni lies on the ground against his will, convulsively trying to get up, and realizes, most likely, his brother used magic against him. Frey's face is again twisted into an evil smile, and he mercilessly mocks his brother, feigning sympathy. He says that while Igni was idle, he managed to surpass his brother in everything. After that, Frey looks at his brother with disgust again and says that this is exactly why he is the heir of the Lazarite family. After that, he stops using magic on Igni and orders him to disappear. Igni finally gets up from the ground and immediately runs away from the estate while his brother continues laughing after him. Igni's face froze with fear, small tears in his eyes, and he still couldn't believe that this was really happening. Running away from home without looking back, Igni managed to find a job that had nothing to do with magic: clean the sewage. He stood in the storm tunnels, wearing cheap clothes, and cleaned the sewage with a shovel. Suddenly, bright beams of light burst from the end of the tunnel behind Igni. The boy is very frightened by this. He sharply turns around and looks at them, mesmerized and confused. A figure wrapped in magic flies past Igni at incredible speed, and Igni manages to recognize his grandfather in it. Hearing a familiar voice, Cruz stops and turns his attention to his grandson. He greets Igni, who calmly hovers over the water. Igni asks in surprise what Grandpa is doing in the sewer. He awkwardly rubs the back of his head and says he is just hiding from someone. Igni asks fearfully what his grandfather has done again. Then Cruz tells his grandson. The owner of the house suddenly returned, and he managed to rush to the toilet like a whirlwind. They almost found him. Then he continues the story. To get down into the sewer, he had to resort to magic. After this, Cruz asks in surprise what Igni is doing in the sewer tunnels. He is clearly displeased with the question. He looks away with hostility and says that he was kicked out of the house. Cruz does not understand the full seriousness of the situation in a joking tone and asks if Igni was kicked out of the house just like he was. He bursts out shouting, "But I was really kicked out of the house." Igni begs himself for talent and insists that he will never be cool. Cruz listens carefully, then decides to test his grandson's abilities himself. A magical circle flashes before him and Cruz sees that Igni has fire magic of rank F. Then he asks Igni if he wants to become cool. He answers, hesitating a little, that now it is already impossible. But Cruz interrupts him and asks again louder whether he wants to become cool or not. His loud tone slightly frightens Igni. Cruz's face distorts with fear as he, shouting at his grandson, demands, "Decide right now to remain a coward or dive headfirst into the depths." Igni looks at him a little scared and mentally notes, his grandfather is too persistent, but isn't he the best mage? Igni thinks about what exactly he wants. He knows. He cannot see Rosa, and if this continues, he will be thrown into the sewer, but he does not want that. Igni gathered his thoughts, closed his eyes, and hesitating a little, but loudly declared that he wants to become cool. After that, he adds less enthusiastically that he is a weakling, to which Cruz replies, "You are weak now, but your spirit is strong." He turns his back to his grandson and wisely says that the whole point of being cool is that strong boys become popular. But after that, he glances at his grandson and adds that boys who give their all are much cooler. These words greatly inspire Igni. There is no longer any sadness or despair on his face. Cruz says that since Igni has already decided, they will go to training right now. After that, he lifts his grandson with one hand and flies out of the sewer. Together they soar high above the forest and head towards many mountains and cliffs. Where they arrive, there is a small sign warning people about a dangerous chasm. Arriving at the place, Cruz climbs down to the ground and also lets his grandson onto it. As soon as Igni steps on the soil and looks around, he is overwhelmed with horror. He realizes where they are. Holding on to fear, he asks his grandfather why he brought him to the Demon King's territory after all. He himself said that Igni is still too weak. Cruz looks at him with incomprehension and says that the Demon King died several years ago. In response, Igni reminds him that the remains of the Demon King still spawn monsters, so even strong boys do not want to go there. Cruz says there is a reason why he chose this place. He tells Igni to try to use his magical power. Igni, completely confused, asks if using his magical power will not cause him to become magically exhausted and die. After this, Igni gets scared when he thinks his grandfather will just get rid of him right here. Cruz calmly replies that there is no reason to deceive Igni and reminds him he once wanted to be cool himself. Realizing his grandfather's words, Ian gathers his thoughts, clenches his fists, and focuses. Then he shouts that he will definitely become cool, and then concentrates magic between his palms, forming a fireball. But in a moment he falls exhausted and his little flame slips from his hands to the ground and goes out. Igni exhales wearily, but immediately after that feels something strange. Igni immediately stands up and looks at himself shocked. He can't believe his magic has already been restored. Then Cruz explains, the air in the Demon King's territory is saturated with magical power, so the vessel fills with magic moment by moment. After the explanation, Ian looks at his grandfather with surprise and asks what benefit it will bring to him specifically. Cruz explains, excessive magical power is deadly dangerous, but the limit of magical power can be raised if you do it again and again, then Igni will become stronger each time. Igni asks why they are doing this in the territory of the Demon King. Then Cruz asks him to imagine a situation. After he gained power, he is sitting in a bar surrounded by women and drinks, and he answers the question of where he got such strength. Igni replies that he has passed through the lands of the Demon King. Igni likes it. And immediately after this, he says to his grandfather, even if he can become stronger, he will still only be able to throw fireballs. Cruz asks if Igni knows about the so-called specialization with a single attribute or about single elementers. He explains, those who can use only one attribute must instead develop greater magical power. Cruz says that only they can study one element, but no one said that you cannot become the strongest mage using a single technique, and Cruz has been thinking about this for a long time. After this, he points to Igni and says that he will be called One Sister. At first, Igni looks as if he hesitated and does not like this idea. But already in a moment, a smile flashes on his face, and he confidently declares that this is exactly how he will become super cool, imagining how he will boast about his title and abilities in front of the beauties. Cruz proudly looks at his grandson and rejoices in his thoughts. He managed to inspire Igni to act. He began to randomly create small fireballs. 2 years have passed. Igni stands on the territory of the Demon King. Around him, 3 giant spiders. They are already ready to attack, but Igni activates Fire Volley, instantly dealing with all the monsters. Cruz proudly watches as his grandson knocks down a hell spider with one blow, and Ignite confidently states that this is just the beginning, there will be even more ahead. He shows his grandfather the huge skeleton of the defeated dragon, and barely believes that his grandson was able to defeat an SS-rank skeleton dragon. Igni asks if this is suitable for the trial, and then confidently says, if I could defeat such a monster myself, then I would pass. Ian confidently says that now he can definitely become a traveler, and suddenly Cruz declares that he will not become a traveler. These words shock Ian. He asks in surprise why his grandfather decided so, since Igni worked so hard for this. Then Cruz, with a gloomy face, reveals the truth. Among travelers there are only men. He begins to tremble with anger and even cries, insisting that no romances will work there. He recalls his youth and asks his grandson not to repeat his mistakes. Such a reaction slightly frightens Ian. He falls to his knees and in despair asks his grandfather what to do next if not to become a traveler. But Cruz assures him that everything is fine, he has thought everything through. He hands his grandson a piece of paper and says that this is exactly where he should go as the next step. Looking at the paper, he sees that it says something about Role Mod Magic Academy, and Cruz explains, this is a pass for the exam. He leans toward his grandson and whispers in his ear, once it was a school for girls, but now it is still 80 female. Igni catches the hint and a smile appears on his face. He gladly realizes that his super popular life has finally started. Excitedly, he asks when the exam will be, and Cruz answers, the exam is tomorrow. Igni clearly did not expect such an answer, so he asks again surprised, and again receives the same. The bell outside was loudly ringing early in the morning. The important day of the entrance exam had come. Igni lay in bed and clearly had no desire to get up, even though the bell was ringing so loudly that you couldn't miss it. He wearily turns over in bed, covers himself with a blanket, and hides his face, wondering why the bell rings today. Suddenly he sits up, sharply remembering that today is the entrance exam day. Hastily getting ready, Igni rushes through the city streets with all his might. He knew he might not make it because he was already late. He did not like that Grandpa suddenly announced the exam, so there was no need to worry about paying for accommodation. Grandpa handed him a bag of money and said that from now on everything depended on him. Still, it was too much for him. Roll Mod Magic Academy is the most prestigious educational institution in the entire kingdom of Antime. Women have a greater inclination towards magical arts than physical ones, so most students in this school are girls. He understands, starting a harem while studying in such a place is not such an unattainable dream, and he will not miss his chance. Suddenly something swiftly flies over his head, immediately looks up. Beauty in a large hat and short dress swiftly flies above him on a broomstick. Raising his head, Igni manages to catch a glimpse of what is under her skirt, and a scrap of paper immediately falls onto his face, covering his eyes. Ian quickly pulls the paper off his face, looks at it and sees. It is an exam pass, the same as his. Ian understands the girl who let him in is also an examiner, who is late for the exam at the academy. After this, a thought flashes in his mind, and he decides to use a volley of fire. The girl flying on a broom suddenly hears an unfamiliar male voice asking if she lost something. Igna calmly glides in the air next to her and says that he, like her, is heading to Ramad Magic Academy. The girl fearfully asks who he is. She did not expect to see anyone at such a height. Igni introduces himself to the lady, states his name, says he is the same examinee as she is, and handing her the exam pass, returns it to its owner. After this, the girl looks at Igni and asks with curiosity how he flies through the air, suggesting that he uses some kind of fire spell technique. Igni replies that it is a normal fireball. The girl is surprised. She knows that a fireball has nothing to do with the type of air movement spells, so she asks the boy not to joke like that. Igni changes the subject and reminds that they need to hurry. Only then does the girl remember. She has no time to talk to him. She is already preparing to slip away from him and fly away. But just now, Ian stops her, places his hand on her shoulder, and suggests how to get to the desired place very quickly. The girl looks at him a little worried. Igni continues and says that at this pace they will both be late, so his suggestion seems very appropriate. After thinking for a moment, the girl replies that there is almost no time left and agrees. Igni politely apologizes. Igni easily and carefully lifts the girl while she holds the broom, and he asks her to hold on tight. The girl is terribly embarrassed by the situation and a little confused. As soon as Igni saw the girl, he immediately decided to use the new spell he had just invented. He steps on his fire projectile and, pushing off sharply, flies forward at incredible speed. It is already time for the exam at the academy. The organizers notice that there are still students who have not appeared. However, time passes. They are already closing the gate. But before they could close the gates, a small explosion sounded on the academy grounds, and in its place appeared a girl and a boy. With relief, he says they barely made it in time. Igni stood solemnly, holding the girl to his chest, and calmly stated that they were both examinees, then asked for permission to enter. The girl trembled in his arms and still did not understand what was happening. The man asked if she was okay and if she had not been kidnapped. He takes out the list of those allowed to take the exams and asks the boy and girl to state their names and show their exam passes. Igni introduces himself and shows his pass. Then the man turns to the girl and asks her name. The girl grabs the edge of her hat, carefully tilts it, and slightly covers her face, then quietly says her first and last name Alicia Esmeraldo and shows her exam pass. The man finds their names on the list and says that they are both the last to arrive for the exam. He asks them to step forward onto the academy grounds and clarifies that there will be a square there where the exam will take place. On the way to the exam location, Igni notices that something is wrong with the girl. He asks what exactly happened, and she quietly replies that she just doesn't like to stand out. Hearing this, Igni was surprised, after which he told Alicia that they probably came for nothing since they stood out too much, and Alicia clearly felt uncomfortable because of it. She agrees with Ian but also notes that thanks to this she was not late for the exam. She blushed deeply and shyly and quietly thanked Ian for his help. Seeing her reaction, Ian suddenly realized. He looked at Alicia and surprised looked away, embarrassed. Ian understood. She was a milkmaid, and he remembered that his grandfather had told him exactly that. Igni strikes a cold pose and casually says that since she was in trouble, it was quite natural for him to act that way. She is not surprised by this and does not understand why he started speaking so strangely. Igni and Alicia arrive together at the square where the exam will take place. Other examiners have already gathered in the square. the exam organizer says he will now explain the task. Igni and Alicia stand at the very end of the crowd. Alicia is glad they arrived on time. She grips the broom tightly in her hands, but Igni clearly does not share her joy, looks at the other spectators, a nasty grimace on his face. He has only one thing in his head. More than half of those who took the test are boys. He clearly does not like that this is not what he heard. He begins to get angry as soon as the thought comes that his grandfather deceived him. Alicia notices his strange behavior and asks what happened. He comes to his senses and apologizes, saying he was just thinking a little. Igni notices that some of the examinees are standing in restricted zones and starting to cast magic. He asks in confusion what each is doing, and Alicia only sighs in despair, realizing he hasn't listened to the explanation at all. Next to one of the walls bordering the square stood several large wooden targets. Alicia says the first test is a check of magical power. You have to hit the target with magic. She says that here they will evaluate magical technique, response speed, and efficiency. Then Igni asks if the targets will break if hit with full force. Alicia explains to him that these targets are made of a special material that disperses magical power, so they allow withstanding magical attacks. No matter how much power he has, he will not be able to break them. Suddenly, the exam organizer calls examinee number 120 to start the first test, but it turns out to be Igni, and Alicia wishes him good luck. Igni sneaks behind the fence and stands in front of the targets. The examiner looks at his scores on the list. He sees that Igni's fire magic is rated F, and thinks that Igni is trying to pass the exam only by luck. Igni absorbs the power of Igni and remembers the words of his grandfather. He said, the secret to being cool is that those who brag are cool. Igni is full of determination to stand out among other students as much as possible. Igni carefully gazes at the target before him, the very one that, as mentioned earlier, cannot be broken by any means. No matter how strong the magic hand, immediately understands what he must do. Igni decides to break the target. A small fireball flares up in his palm and instantly grows. Igni immediately directs this fiery barrage at the small target. The fireball's impact on the wall ended with a powerful explosion. When the smoke from the explosion clears, Alicia looks at the spot where the target stood and cannot believe what she sees. All contenders look in one direction, their mouths agape in surprise. Alicia and the others watch the spot where the target stood. Igni simply turned it to dust, and a huge hole remained in the wall from the fireball. While everyone, mouths agape, looks at the broken wall, Ian strikes and holds a cool pose, then begins to smile smugly. He poses, shows off to the girls, and is proud of the sparkle in their eyes and his huge success. Igni joyfully realizes, if he continues to stand out so brightly, he will definitely become popular, just as one of the examiners grabs him by the shoulder. He points to the side, shudders, and says that Igni will continue the exam in a simulated battle. Igni looks at him with confusion and clearly did not expect such a turn. Igni moves on to the next stage of the exam. He enters a huge anemone doors protruded from above, but the arena itself was empty. There was no one there except Igni. He falls into despair and grabs his head as soon as he realizes. This way he won't be able to stand out before anyone. In despair, he asks himself why this is happening to him. Meanwhile, someone sneaks up from behind and asks if he really broke the targets, calling him a troubled child. Igni turns around and sees a short, pretty girl with pointed ears and a friendly face. She introduces herself, Muran Ivkarka, unique, rare, and practically impossible to find anywhere in the world. She told Ian that she would lead the next stage and that she was glad to meet him. Ian blushed slightly looking at her, recalling his grandfather's words that the best are short girls. Myra asked his name, and Igni looked down at her. At that time, he did not understand what his grandfather meant, but now he did. However, he also thinks it would be much better if she had bigger breasts, and even if his grandfather calls these words heresy, for him it is still better than nothing. Igni is pulled from his thoughts by Myra's remark. They will soon start the next stage of the exam. Igni asks what will happen in the next stage. A moment later, Myra suddenly appears behind him and answers. The next stage is a fight with her. Igni instantly turns around and quickly takes a few steps back from her, and Myra enthusiastically praises his reaction. However, after that she says, one who is capable of destroying goals cannot be an ordinary child, and since he can no longer be tested in the usual way, a training fight with the teacher was specially organized for him. Myra explains the rules of the arena. The winner is the one who touches the opponent first. Igni says that it is quite simple. In response, Myra giggles and points at him, as if he is not allowed to say such a thing at all. But as soon as a threatening smile appears on her face now, it is by no means as friendly and innocent as before. Suddenly she disappears from Ian's sight, but he manages to realize. Myra is about to appear behind him to try to touch him before he notices her. He manages to dodge even before the teacher appears behind him, almost touching. Realizing that she is too close, Igni decides to use fire barrage. After a small explosion next to him, a shockwave is born, Ian's body is thrown to the side, and the distance between him and his teacher instantly increases. Myra clearly enjoys how the future student dodged the explosion and decides to use something else to catch her by surprise. She summons magical spheres, and around Igni rises a whole flock of black fragments flying straight at him. Igni manages to strike with a volley of fire. He creates 3 fireballs that destroy all the projectiles with explosions. The explosion in the arena raises smoke and dust into the air, sharply reducing visibility. Seeing how Igni intercepts the spheres with fireballs, Myra is already ready to praise him, but he cuts her off and does not let her finish her words of thanks, interrupting her. Myra raises her head in surprise, looks at Ignis standing in front of her, opens her eyes wide and realizes his left hand is touching her head, and Igna meanwhile casually informs her of his victory. Barely running his hand over the teacher's head, voicing his assumptions that her magic belongs to the spatial category, like teleportation. Myra says he is right, but wonders how he managed to figure it out at all. Igni starts stroking her head more actively and asks about the result, but Myra asks him to stop. Myro replies that he has already passed the exam, adding, he was counted even back when he was knocking down targets. Igni, surprised, you could have said that earlier. But Myra disagrees and says there will always be children who won't tolerate this. She asks why Igni wastes energy on fireballs if he has SS rank fire and could use stronger spells. He turns away from her and says that he has the rank F fire and cannot use anything except fireballs. Myra does not believe his words and thinks he is joking. Igni says he is telling the truth because they are classmates, and he says this with all his pride. Myra looks at him confused and asks what it means, and Igni is happy that he passed the exam calmly and without much difficulty. Having successfully passed the exam, Igni finally entered Roll Mod Magic Academy and, like many students, settled in the dormitory. Finally, what he had been waiting for so long began his new life. Igni opened the door to his room in the boys' dormitory. He looked around the small, cozy room with 2 beds and a shared wardrobe, noting, the rooms are designed for 2. Igni was not satisfied with this. He did not really want to make acquaintances with guys, so he hoped that at least the roommate would not make noise. Igni looks back at the part of the room where a whole mountain of suitcases is the future neighbor, owns an incredible pile of bags and boxes, and suddenly a bad feeling overwhelms him. And remembering that the dormitory is free, he decides, poor people like him should be grateful. Suddenly, it dawns on Igni that the initiation ceremony is about to start, and he quickly jumps out of the room. He sharply opens the door and accidentally hits a man passing by. Igni asks if he is okay and apologizes for opening the door so suddenly. However, looking at the man, Ian finally notices. In front of him is a girl pretty, with a delicate and graceful figure and short light hair. She awkwardly hurries to assure him that she is fine. Ian becomes friendlier and introduces himself, then asks the girl her name. The girl smiles and says that her name is Yuri. She just joined and is glad to meet you. But for some reason, she refers to herself in the masculine gender. At first, Igni is surprised, then he understands it's incredibly cute. He remembers how once, as a child, he asked his grandfather if it was strange when girls speak like boys. And the grandfather replied that most women refer to themselves in the feminine gender, and there's nothing wrong if someone speaks in the masculine. He also said that inconsistency in behavior is wonderful, and that makes Igni very happy. Yuri suddenly grabs Igni's hands and gently asks why they didn't come to the ceremony at the entrance. Igni freezes and blushes when a woman's hand touches him. Yuri, not letting go of the new acquaintance Jilov and holding his hand, leads him to the ceremony, while Igni thinks only about how soft the woman's hand is. Even after the ceremony, when Yuri had already let go of Igni's hand, he still joyfully remembered how warm and soft it was, and his own hands trembled a little. Igni is truly happy that he was accepted into the magic school, and Yuri stands by the bulletin board, looking at which classes they and Igni were assigned to. Yuri calls Igni and happily says that they are in the same class, but as soon as he looks at the board he sees Yuri is standing in front of the Class D list, and this clearly does not please him. He looks at the list in shock. He is 4th from the top and was sure he would be among the strongest. Yuri looks at him worriedly and asks what happened because he suddenly turned pale. After that, Yuri suddenly, fearfully, asks if he reacted that way because the very thought of sitting with Yuri in the same class disgusted him. Igni quickly assures her that this is not the case at all. Later, Igni meets Alicia outside, and she tells him that classes will be reformed next year. She's hanging above the ground on a broom and hints that Igni is so angry about being sent to Class D because he tried to make himself look bad in front of everyone. Igni continues trying to look cool in front of her, and with a puffed-up, pompous face, says that they haven't seen each other for a long time. Alicia descends to the ground and asks him to stop his Playboy show. After that, she smiles and says that she is also in Class D and can count on him. Yuri, who is standing nearby, is happy that Alicia will also be in Class D and smilingly says that he is glad to meet him. Alicia immediately attacks Yuri, calls her cute, and compares her to a fairy, curiously asks Igni where he met such a cute child, and at the same time touches on the fact that Yuri speaks about herself in the masculine gender. Alicia sweetly praises Yuri's short haircut, comparing him to a small animal, and Yuri shyly asks her to stop because if it continues like this, they might be late for the entrance ceremony. 3 approach the assembly hall where the graduation ceremony was taking place. One of the teachers delivers a speech and tells the audience to be proud that they are called Roman students. Myra stands nearby and yawns tiredly, while another teacher says that although the students' training will last only 3 years, they will eagerly await the success of their students. After the entrance ceremony ended, Yuri stood up and stretched tiredly, grumbling that the director's speech was too long, but Igni does not think so at all. He sat on the bench with his head down and thought of only one thing. During the entire director's speech, he did not even find time to recall the faces of all the girls who were present. Suddenly, he notices that all the students are going somewhere together. In complete surprise, he asks Alisa where everyone is going, and she replies that Igni overslept everything again. The director approaches them, leans down, and with a smile explains, as soon as everyone goes to their lessons, they will be told everything in more detail, and she also says that they can sit absolutely anywhere they want. After that she leaves, and Alicia smiles and remarks what a good teacher she is, but Igni only noticed her figure and glasses. He remembered how in childhood he told his grandfather that glasses are evil and that sweet girls do not need glasses at all. In response, the grandfather suddenly slapped him with all his might. Igni fell to the floor. Holding his cheek, he asked in complete surprise and indignation why this had happened to him. The grandfather replied that it was still too early for Igni. But still, it is ignorance to criticize what you do not understand. Recalling the situation, Igni realizes glasses are usually just a trifle, and the grandfather said everything correctly then. Alicia says it's time for them to go to class. Yuri, Alicia, and Igni enter the classroom and sit in their seats. Igni and Yuri settle next to each other, and Alicia sits in front of them. She looks back and asks Yuri what his attribute is. She replies that her attribute is darkness, which greatly surprises Alicia. She also asks what Yuri's specialization is. To this, she hesitantly answers that it is support. Igni thinks that Yuri probably does not want to talk about it. He decides to ask Alicia about her abilities. She replies that she has wind, that's why she is so skilled both in magic and in support. Then Igni says he hopes to become a master of magic. Alicia becomes uncomfortable and says that she has a very specific family, so she cannot decide who she wants to become. Igni falls silent, and all 3 feel the atmosphere grow heavier. He tries to change the subject, says that he has fire and that he is the best at fireballs. Someone from the class overhears his words and clearly does not like them. A young boy named Edward shows that he does not like that Igni came to this academy, and the dark-haired boy next to him says, "That's the same one with F-rank fire." Edward says with annoyance that rumors had already been going around, even the lowest ranked got in here this year, but still asks Igni with irritation why he even came to the academy. Alicia cannot tolerate their rudeness and decides to defend her friend. Igni passed the exam, proving his abilities. She saw it with her own eyes, so he cannot have an F rank. But Igni calmly tells her that he really has F rank fire, and this shocks Alicia. Then the dark-haired boy calmly and without any doubt states, Igni cheated on the exam. Igni is not angry, he only calmly reminds that this school values strength. Edward wants to respond to him, but their conversation is cut off. The teacher claps his hands to attract the students' attention. In front of them stands a teacher who gave a speech at the opening ceremony. She smiles and introduces herself, says she is the homeroom teacher of the first grade D. Aliner. Her attribute is life, and her rank is B, the lowest of all. The other students are surprised by this, and Alicia says that Roll Mod Academy is a world-class school. She heard that there are teachers with S rank and even SS rank, and Aliner is a teacher with B rank. After that, she confidently says that this teacher is a monster. Aliner sadly admits. Her words scared them. She sees how her students' faces have changed, but understands that if she had not said this immediately, they would have gotten angry. After that, Aliner asks for silence in the class and says that she will now announce the most important rules of the academy. She says that, as Ian said earlier, this school values ability. The stronger is right, the weaker is wrong. The overwhelming aura of these words frightens some of the students, and she continues, saying that, in her opinion, those present here are already strong enough, but at the same time asks them not to stop and to become even stronger. After these words, Aliner says that she needs to mark the attendance. All students are present. Then Aliner asks if anyone has questions, and one of them raises a hand. Aliner looks at the student and tries to remember her name with slight uncertainty. She stands up and says her name Iris, and also says that her attribute is Earth rank S. Iris asks the teacher if she will be ranked higher than Alina if she can defeat her in battle. Alina answers thoughtfully that yes. Then she asks Iris if she understands why she will not be able to do that. Alina approaches the student very closely and says that Iris will not overcome her because she is stronger, while Alina uses magic. Several small spheres fly from her hands and hit Iris. After that, Iris suddenly silently looks at her with wide-open eyes, then silently sits back in her seat. Nothing remains of her former confidence. She looks scared. Life seems to have gone out of her eyes. She just stares at one point and does not move, while the rest of the students look at her with anxiety. Alina asks if everyone in the class understood her words. After this, she turns to face the class and says that this experience is very important, but they will definitely return to this topic later. If no student has any more questions, their first lesson will be concluded. Finally, Alina tells the students that she is ready to take on this challenge at any time. After these words, she immediately adds, she can only not accept it during working hours. Then she says goodbye to the students and leaves the classroom. After this, all the students also slowly gather their things and leave the classroom. Ian quickly gets up from his seat, while Yuri does not hurry to stand. She looks at him and suggests going back together. However, Igni, with a serious face, tells her that they must immediately help Iris. Yuri does not fully understand what he means. Igni explains, when the teacher approached Iris, he saw that she had sent spores to her. Inside the human body, they grow and reproduce very quickly, and later it will be much harder to remove them. Iris is still sitting in her place motionless, with the same empty gaze, and Igni says that she is weaker than the teacher thought, so she will not recover from this state on her own. Later, Igni explains, to help Iris, she needs to be made to drink a large amount of water, then she will be able to cough up the spores. Igni asks Yuri to help, and she immediately agrees. Alicia also joins them. She helps bring Iris to the fountain and gives her a sip of water. After this, Igni helps her lean forward and tells her to spit out the spores. After several coughs, Iris finally spits out the spores. They come out as a long black clot. She falls to her knees, exhausted, and Igni asks how she feels, worried. Coming to her senses, Iris begins to cry and says that she only remembers how everything suddenly went dark in her eyes. After this, she throws herself into Ian's arms and sobs, confessing how scared she was. Later, Iris regained consciousness and went with 3 new friends. Yuri was glad to learn that Iris also lives in the dormitory, and Iris herself was very happy that Igni lives in the dormitory. Alicia looks at the boy and sees Igni is a bit out of sorts. She does not understand why he is angry and says that on the contrary, he should be happy. However, Igni only thinks that he imagined it. Iris will be amazed by his courage and knowledge and will definitely fall in love with him after he saves her. But in reality, she fell at his feet and said she would be grateful to him for life. At this moment, Iris, blushing, hugs Ian and with a gentle look says she envies the one who lives with him in the same room after all. She wouldn't mind living with him either. After her words, Igni suddenly remembers. He never found out who shares the dorm room with him all because he spent all his time in this flower garden, surrounded exclusively by girls. Iris pulls him out of his intrusive thoughts. She tugs at the edge of his sleeve and calls him. With a look filled with slight hostility, she looks at Alicia and Yuri and asks Igni when he met them. Igni begins to recall and fragmentarily, without details, says he met Alicia on the day of the entrance exam and near the dorm accidentally bumped into Yuri. After these words, Igni suddenly realizes something. It turns out that the first time he met Yuri was on the territory of the male dormitory, although Yuri is a girl. By this time, all 3 are already approaching the dormitory, and then Yuri takes Igni by the hand and pulls him toward the dormitory. She says it's time to go to the dormitory, just don't forget to say goodbye to everyone else. Iris is outraged that Yuri stands too close to Igni and asks why he even wants to go to the boys' dormitory. Yuri just laughs in response and doesn't understand what Iris is talking about because Yuri is a boy. Iris and Alicia freeze in shock as Igni is about to faint. Yuri doesn't understand their reaction. It should be obvious, since he lives in the same room with Igni. Iris screams in fear that Igni has fainted. In front of Igni stand Alina, Alicia, and Yuri all in swimsuits. Alina playfully asks if he wants to play with Sensei. Alicia asks more confidently, and Yuri behaves too modestly, slightly covering his body. Igni watches this with genuine pleasure, although he perfectly understands. Forcing girls to fight for him is a sin for a man, but despite everything, he continues to look at the girls with frank enjoyment. But Ian's dream is broken by a voice calling his name. Closing his eyelids tiredly, he opens his eyes and through the darkness barely sees the silhouette of a very beautiful girl standing right in front of him. Opening his eyes, he clearly sees Yuri in front of him. He has been tirelessly trying to wake him up all this time, looming over him. Igni has not fully come to yet, so he suddenly sits up, thinking that a girl is in front of him. But a second later, memories of yesterday surface in his mind. Yuri, already in his school uniform, is sitting on the bed waiting for Igni to get dressed. He says that when he woke up, he was scared and asks him to get ready faster. Igni goes to the wardrobe and puts on his uniform. Only one thought spins in his head: how can someone as sweet as Yuri turn out to be a boy? And he even honestly admits that he is actually a girl disguised as a boy. While Igni packs his things, Yuri asks if his luggage is not too small. He says he only brought one small bag. Igni says the same happened to him. Then Igni decides to ask Yuri if that huge mess of stuff is his. Yuri is a bit awkward but explains. When he said he was accepted to the academy, the villagers gathered all these things for him because of his talent. After all, he is the first male mage in their village. After these words, Igni sits on the bed, lowers his head, and says that Yuri is probably really a boy in a desperate state. Yuri does not understand what he is talking about and asks him to stop saying strange things so they can finally go to class. Class D arrives at a large arena, which, apparently, was used for battles. They are informed that this will be a group lesson, and someone says that this is their first time in a practical class. From the crowd of students, a raised hand is visible, and a female voice greets the students of 1D. This is Myra trying somehow to stand out among those taller than her. Myra jumped up and waved at Igni, greeting him and asking how he feels. He indifferently replies that Sensei has the greatest fighting spirit, and again starts stroking Myra's head while she tiredly asks him to stop. Alicia approaches the teacher and happily says that she also wants to stroke her head, and Yuri chimes in, saying he is seeing an elf for the first time. Myra blushes and reminds them that she is their teacher after all. She shifts her gaze to the other students and announces to the whole class, today they will have a practical fight, but she does not have time to say who their opponents are. Because Myra notices, their opponents have just entered the class for training. In front of the crowd of students, one of them confidently steps forward. The crowd of students approaches the teacher, and ahead of them confidently walks a girl with long dark hair, a sword at her belt. She apologizes to the teacher for being late and says they were held up in the previous lesson. Myra greets class 1C. Alicia was about to ask who this girl was, but Igni doesn't let her finish and answers immediately. This is the magical fencer Elena Orate, and this year she took first place. Alicia looks at Elena and sees the sword at her belt. She doesn't understand why in the magical academy she is allowed to carry and use a sword. Myra explains to her that magical swordsmen fight by combining magic and fencing, so they can't do without weapons, and if they don't find the right balance, nothing will work. Alicia then says that swordsmen are strong. After that, Myra turns to the class and says that since both classes have gathered, they can start. She asks the students to first break into pairs. Iris immediately listens attentively to her words. At that very moment, someone firmly grabs Igni by the sleeve, clearly not going to let go. Iris literally hugs his arm and immediately shouts that she will be in the group with him because she clearly doesn't want to give in to anyone. Iris continues to hold his hand, looking at Igni with loving eyes. Yuri turns to Alicia and offers to be in the same group with him. Alicia agrees, looking at Iris and calling this picture terribly creepy. But despite Iris's efforts, Myra decides that Igni will be in Elena's group, and this shocks all three, especially Iris and Elena, who responds to these words with a look full of hostility. Myra asks them to remember, the main thing is a one-on-one duel, so everything will continue until one of them admits defeat or Myra herself stops the fight. After that, she asks if the students have any questions. Igni is about to say that he has no questions, but Elena cuts him off abruptly. She says she has a question. Looking very dissatisfied, she asks why she should even fight this guy, meaning Igni. Myra casually replies that she just thought, if she and Igni fought first, their fight would definitely inspire others. Elena mockingly replies that she will defeat Igni in a moment. In response to Myra, with a more serious facial expression, and the same tone, she says that she knows very well about Elena's development, but it would be better for her to learn to properly assess the opponent's abilities. Myra adds, otherwise Elena will join the ranks of students who died during their studies. The mention of death frightens Yuri greatly, but the others listen to the teacher attentively. Elena does not give up, and with some disgusting feeling as if her pride was hurt, asks the teacher if this boy is stronger than her. Myra looks at her with a smile. She replies that she did not say, Igni is stronger than her, but since Elena is so confident in herself, Myra suggests introducing a penalty for the loser. The loser will obey the winner in everything for a month. Igni is about to tell the teacher that he does not want to fight the girl at full strength, but his words immediately anger Elena. She loudly and confidently declares that the very thought of her defeat is simply ridiculous and decides to accept the teacher's proposal. She tells Igni that if he loses, he will become a slave of Class C for a month. Yuri, looking at everything happening, begins to worry terribly and says that they need to stop this, otherwise Igni will die. Iris agrees with him. She knows that Igni's rival is the eldest daughter of the Orate family. Having said these words, Igni recalls, the Orate family, like his own, is known for its high positions. He looks at Alina full of rage, ready to rush at any moment, and understands. This is why she has so much pride. Suddenly, from the crowd of students, someone shouts excitedly to Igni with a familiar voice, "Stop immediately." Turns out to be Edward trembling, and saying that Igni only has an F-fire rank, so he can replace him. His comrade orders Igni to be grateful for Edward's mercy, and Igni replies that he is already more worried about him after all. He is good. Despite his words, Igni confidently stands before his opponent. He recalls his previous words about how strength is valued in this school. Igni confidently stands before Alina and tells everyone who worried about him that there is no need to worry. Students from Class C begin to whisper. They say Igni is F-rank, wondering how he even got into the academy, and now thinks he can defeat Alina. Alina prepares for the fight, puts her hands on her scabbards and apologizes for their class being so loud, openly mocks Igni he can hear what they are saying. Igni replies that he does not care. A threatening smile appears on Alina's face, already senses victory in advance. She says that Igni seems too confident in himself. Igni mentally replies to her, calmness must be shown even when difficulties arise. Then Alina says that in that case she will not stand on ceremony with Een, and he confidently replies, that suits him perfectly. Myra raises her hand and calls the fighters to prepare for battle. Alina takes a fighting stance, ready to draw her sword from its sheath at any moment. Igni, on the other hand, stood completely calmly confident in his own strength. A few seconds pass and Myra lowers her hand with a whistle, signaling the fight to begin. At that moment, Alina tries to draw her sword, but something stops her. Surprise and a barely perceptible fear appear on her face. Alina suddenly realizes that she cannot move her hand. She cannot pull out the sword and attack the opponent. These few moments of numbness are enough, and right before Alina's face, Igni suddenly appears. He covers Alina's hand, which was already reaching to grab the sword by the hilt, with his palm. At that very moment her eyes widen with fear and the realization of what is happening. She still cannot move, but sees several fireballs around her tightly squeezing the ring, closing in a circle. Igni, not letting go of her hand, says with a confident smile, "If you need to fight a magical swordsman, just don't let him draw his sword." In a moment Myra loudly declares that this is enough, raises her hand up, and thereby announces the end of the fight. After this, Myra approaches Alina, and with a relieved expression, tries to say that she really needs to be able to assess an opponent, but does not manage to finish. Alina does not want to listen to her, but instead of getting angry completely unexpectedly, for Everyonish runs away in tears, calling the teacher's words nonsense. At first Igni is simply surprised by such a reaction, but suddenly remembers his grandfather's words. If a girl runs away from him with tears, it means he is obliged to catch up with her. After this, Igni immediately regains consciousness and decides to go after Alina as quickly as possible, warning Myra. After a long search, Igni finally finds Alina. She is sitting on the ground, leaning against a column, hugging her knees. She has lowered her head so low that her face is not visible. Hearing a familiar voice asking if she is okay, Alina silently understands with a single nod. She turns her head to Igni and confidently replies that she is not crying at all. She tells Igni the class hierarchy is based on a person's strength, and in their class, Alina is the strongest student. But today she lost for the first time, not even managing to draw her sword from its sheath. She begins to cry and says that she drank her own strength, and since she came first in the entrance exam, she had to keep up the standard. She repeats, since she came first, she had to be first. Alina breaks down again and starts crying. Tears stream down her face like rain, and in despair, she asks why everything turned out this way if she was supposed to be the best. Igni sees how hard it is for her. He feels a little awkward. He does not fully understand how to calm her down. A thought flashes in his mind to hug her right now, but he manages to restrain himself because he remembers something. He recalls that, during one of the training sessions with his grandfather, he asked Igni what to do if he needed to calm a girl. Igni confidently replies that he would hug the girl tightly, and then quietly whisper in her ear that everything will be fine to calm her down. But the grandfather is clearly dissatisfied with his answer. He immediately slaps his friend and calls his words disgusting, saying that girls' tears never appear just like that. With great diligence, he explains to his inexperienced grandson that in such a situation, he will have to listen to her problem and then find a solution for her. Then Igni tries to find a solution to Alina's problem. He understands that Alina wanted to appear the strongest and decides which words are best to say. He tells Alina, among all those he has had to fight, she is the strongest. As soon as Alina heard these words, her tear-streaked face lit up, all sorrow and despair vanished from it. She is silent for a moment, then, hesitating and barely stumbling, asks if it is true. To this question, Igni immediately answers with full confidence that yes, it is true. Igni decides not to stop there. He continues to compliment Alina and says that she is also the most beautiful, the strongest, and the best of all those he has had to fight. Alina freezes for a moment from so many compliments. Then for a second she lowers her head and quietly repeats to herself the words that she is the best. With every new second, she gains more and more confidence. After this, Owen smiles joyfully, giggling like a little girl who has just received a compliment for the first time. At this moment, Igni is surprised. This seemingly cold and stern girl turned out to be quite the opposite. When Alina finally calmed down completely, she stood up and extended her hand to Igni. She thanked him and said that he could just call her Alina, and she also asked if she could just call him Igni. He says that he does not care and gently squeezes her hand in his. After that, Igni and Alina return to the classroom. As soon as Myra notices them, she immediately runs up to them, apologizing to Alina with a guilty expression but also saying that, as a teacher, she had to bring her down. Alina tells the teacher that there is nothing to worry about because she understood. Only by acknowledging one's weaknesses can one become stronger. She even says that, even losing, she is still the best. Myra does not understand why Alina suddenly became much happier than before she ran away and at the same time praises Igni for his incredible work. But Myra is still happy that the students are happy. Smiling, she says to Alina, then her punishment begins today. For a moment she freezes in stupor, she does not understand the teacher's words. Then Mir reminds her that they agreed. The winner rules, and the loser must obey and do everything for a Munten one must keep their word. Alina's face trembles with fear. A moment later Alina runs out of the classroom at full speed. Myra demands that Igni run after her and he agrees and quickly catches up with Alina. Now the man is talking with one of the young pupils about the royal tournament there. They will determine one of the strongest. The man says, since the student has a second name, he will probably want to win. The student confidently replies that he will not have to try, he will definitely win, and the man agrees with him as soon as the first ray arrives, Frey Tarqua. One school day Igni, Yuri, Iris, and Alicia were the last in the classroom after lessons and were discussing something lively. Yuri told his friends that he found a coffee shop with very tasty pastries, so he invites everyone to go. They agreed. But still Eleanor interrupts their conversation and addresses Igni. She looks at him with a gentle smile and kindly says that she would like to talk to him about something if he does not mind, of course. Friends walk away from the teacher and their friends so they can talk calmly and privately, and Igni, hearing the teacher's words, wondered what his request for a private meeting after school might mean. The next moment the teenage head begins to paint incredible pictures in imagination. He imagines his beautiful teacher in lighter and more open clothing. Elinor, who stepped back for a moment, returns to Ian, holding a scrap of paper in her hands. Ian's consciousness gives rise to the most incredible fantasies. He lifts a scrap of paper and hopes in his head that it is a love letter, while simultaneously ordering himself to calm down as if he was not trembling so much. Carefully glancing at the paper, he notices it is about a magical tournament competition. The student's strange reaction makes Eleonore ask what happened to him and if he is okay. Disappointed, he replies that everything is fine. As soon as the conversation touched on the magic tournament, Ian's friends immediately approached him, began praising and insisting that it was incredibly cool. Ian does not understand such a reaction, so in confusion he asks if this tournament is really that popular. Elinor says yes, she explains. It is a very famous tournament where once a year the strongest man in the entire kingdom is chosen. The most outstanding people of the kingdom gather to watch this competition. With a smile, she adds, for many years their role mod academy sent about 10 people to the tournament, but this time, for some reason, many candidates refused to go to the tournament. After the teacher's words, Igni confidently states that since Sensei asks him to do it, he agrees. Eleanor cannot contain her joy. He agreed, so this will help them a lot. Eleanor also does not miss the moment to mention a very important part of the tournament. She says, the winner will receive a prize, the chance to become an aristocrat. Igni asks how this can happen at all. Eleanor explains to him, he can become an aristocrat if he marries one of the daughters of an aristocratic family, but surprisingly, these words do not please Igni. Alicia notices her friend's reaction, that strange note in her. She asks with slight mockery why he is not happy. Could it be that he really does not like this? Igni does not answer at first. After that, he confidently states that he does not consider this acceptable at all, because essentially, it is a forced marriage for the girl under pressure from her family. After that, Igni raises his voice and confidently states that a man should not behave like that. On the contrary, he should gain popularity by his own efforts. Eleanor looks at the young student with tenderness and lightly praises him, calling him very cool, until Alicia again does not understand what her friend is talking about. Igni is happy again with his small victory. He managed to impress the woman. In his mind, he is already sure. He is about to become famous because he will be able to manipulate that guy according to his own scenario. Eleanor wants to say something else. She says that if a person who is not from an aristocratic family wins the tournament, he will immediately gain great fame and become recognizable. After that, Igni bows deeply to her and confidently states that he will do everything possible. After everything related to the tournament was discussed, Eleanor says that she needs to introduce Igni to someone. Leaving the auditorium, she asks Igni to follow her. Then Yuri says that in that case they will leave the academy first. Igni says goodbye to them and asks them to eat well at the cafe. Listening to their conversation, Alicia says that they behave like a couple, and Iris begins to be insanely jealous of Igni. Finally, Eleanor leads Igni to a separate room. 3 students were already waiting there. One stood by the window with his back to the door, the second sat listlessly at the table, head down, and the third looked perhaps the happiest of all. Ian looks around the hall where all the future tournament participants are gathered and sees only 2 girls and 1 boy, but he simply accepts this. Eleanor suggests that the students get to know each other. The most energetic girl in the room immediately jumps up to Igni and says her name is Frenda. Unlike the others, she has a headband, and her cloak part of the school uniform is lowered, so she only wears a top over it. Frenda enthusiastically starts bombarding him with questions. She asks if Igni is a freshman and points out that she herself is a sophomore, so it turns out she is his senpai. Then she asks about his patronymic, and Igni replies that he doesn't have one. Frenda says this happily so they are the same. She claims that the 2 students in the room are freshmen, but both have middle names. The girl at the table wearily and quietly looks up and calls her too noisy. After that, the last student, keeping his back to Igni, approaches and says he is glad to meet him. He introduces himself, First Light Frey Tarcola. Frey got so flustered trying to properly introduce himself to the other student that he didn't immediately notice who was standing in front of him. He was about to say he was glad to meet you, but stumbled in the middle of the sentence. Hetty sees Igni who is looking at him, staring blankly at the ground. Frey cannot hide his shock because he recognizes his brother, whom he hasn't seen for so many years, while Igni continues to look at him with confusion. Turned out that Ian's strange reaction is because he simply doesn't remember his brother, but the name Tarkles somehow affects him. He falls silent for a moment and tries to recall where exactly he heard this name and surname. Suddenly he remembers, and the same sharp shock that was just on Frey's face flashes on his. Igni realizes his brother is standing before him, and Frey, it seems, does not like his reaction at all. Frey poked his brother with his index finger as if accusing him and thundered. Supposedly, all he can do is shoot fireballs, so he definitely didn't pass the selection honestly. Igni replied that he passed the selection, thanks to his abilities. In response, Frey declares that his words are outright lies, but Eleanor intervenes in the conversation and confirms Ian's words, honestly passing the entrance exam. She approaches Igni, showing that she is on his side, and points to him, saying that the famous student who broke the target for the first time in 25 years is Igni. Frey does not believe what he hears. The girl at the table still looks indifferent, and Frenda's face suddenly distorts with sadness. Tears appear in her eyes. Frey still does not want to admit the truth. He says that his brother is definitely not capable of that. Igni waves irritably, saying he was already told that it is true. Suddenly, Frenda addresses Igni in a mournful tone. Suddenly she bursts into loud sobs, and Igni is left completely stunned. He tells her that he did not lie and asks her not to cry. She points at him and says she thought he would become her brother-in-arms without a surname, but he did not tell her that he is the very student who broke the target. Igni sees what a difficult predicament he has got himself into and understands. Things are bad. Everything happening in the room begins to remind him of a real battlefield. He tries to find a way out of this situation and recall what his grandfather said in such cases. Suddenly something from the times when he was still a child comes to mind. What if he becomes popular? Then he will not be able to avoid the battlefield when so many girls he likes start fighting for him. Little Igni said that would be very cool, so it is worth becoming cool and popular for that. However, his grandfather says that the battlefield is not so great and asks him to look while he tightens his cloak. After the grandfather took off his outerwear and showed his back, numerous deep scars in the form of scratches were visible on it, as if left by a wild beast. Igni believes that his grandfather got them in a battle with an ancient dragon. But he says that is not so. He explains, these deep wounds were inflicted on him by a girl in the heat of battle, and his little grandson is very surprised that such terrible wounds did not leave behind any great magical battles. The grandfather pulls his outerwear and cloak back on, says that love drives people crazy, so he asks Igni to do everything so that no situation reaches the battlefield. After Ignite was already quite scared upon seeing his grandfather's wounds, he hesitated and with a trembling voice, almost stammering, asked what he should do if the situation actually reached the battlefield. Grandfather is silent for a while, standing with his back to his grandson, and then gives Igni only one very short piece of advice: run. When Igni completely pushed this memory away in his mind, horror gripped him. There was no solution in this situation. While he was thinking, Frenda suddenly jumps out of the room in tears, shouting that she has no comrades here. Igni recalls the situation with Elena and realizes he must run after Frenda. But suddenly someone sharply grabs him by the shoulder and does not let him run out of the room. It is a girl sitting at the table. Eventually she gives her name Amy and says she is a freshman. Igni tries to explain to her that he wants to take Frenda. But despite everything, she completely refuses and says she wants to talk to Igni. Feeling her fingers tighten on his shoulder, Igni understands she is really very strong. Frey addresses Igni again. The tone sharply changes. He says he does not know exactly what Igni did, but now he has changed his mind. A self-satisfied smile appears again on his face, and he says that the tournament is a place where many spectators gather, so he will personally crush Igni in front of everyone, so let him prepare. After these words, Frey proudly and hastily leaves the room, slamming the door behind him with all his might, and silence falls in the hall. After everything that happened, Igni stands silently. It is clear that he is already tired of this whole story. Meanwhile, Amy also remains silent for a while, not letting go of his shoulder. Igni asks her if she has any questions for him, as if she really wanted to talk to Igni about something. After that, Amy finally lets go of his shoulder. She stands in front of him and decisively asks Igni if it is true that she is the student who managed to break the target. Igni answers uncertainly, although he understands. There is no point in hiding it anymore. After these words, which somehow reminded Amy of confirmation, she stands before Igni, places her hand on her heart, and sincerely says that she wants him to shoot her with the same fireball with which he destroyed the target. Of course, these words throw Igni off track, both shocking and somewhat frightening, because it looks as if it is a request to include him in the list of students who died during their studies. Without waiting for confirmation, Emi approaches Elinor and says she wants to reserve the training ground. The teacher supports the desire of her students to engage in self-education and agrees to provide them with the training ground. Igni does not have time to stop them, and after a while he and Emi are standing on the empty training ground, the place where Igni previously passed the second stage of the exam. He asks if she is really sure it could be dangerous. She says she is strong enough to deserve a middle name, so he should not worry about her. She explains that she is a corrupted Emi and that she can suppress an attack of any strength. She runs up to Igni excitedly and says she wants to understand how truly great the power of her skill is. She tries again to persuade Igni to help her with this. Although Igni is still unsure, under her persuasion he eventually agrees and Emi asks him to attack for real. After that she steps back a little from him and Igni launches a fire blast, shooting it at Amy. After such an explosion she remains completely unharmed and says it was wonderful. Everything looks normal, but a moment later her face changes. She blushes deeply, arches her whole body, and screams how pleasurable it is. Igni freezes in shock. This scene clearly made him feel awkward. As if going crazy from pleasure, she immediately demands that Igni shoot again. There is not a trace of sanity in her eyes, and saliva is already flowing from her mouth. Igni looks at the girl in horror, realizing that she is clearly bad. Without wasting time, he recalls the wise words of his grandfather. Once he told him that there are S sadists and M masochists. He insisted, they are all different and all good, and he asked Igni to remember his words. A man is like a vessel, so he must be ready to accept everything. Igni agrees with the words of his grandfather. He understands that the latter is ready to do anything to improve his skills as a man, although he still does not fully understand how exactly. After some thought, Igni agrees to fulfill Emi's request. He again releases an incredibly powerful fireball at her because he thinks it's time for him and his skills to level up. Emi is undoubtedly happy. At that time, Yuri, Iris, and Alicia were walking through the corridors of the academy outside. Yuri and Iris were talking about Igni and how incredible he is. Yuri said that he would definitely support him, and Iris replied that Igni is unmatched in terms of support and encouragement. Then they turn to Alicia and ask if she will support Ian. She clearly does not share their enthusiasm and replies that she will support him but only a little because she is uncomfortable in crowds. Suddenly, the three hear a terrible explosion. Iris fearfully asks what that sound was, and Alicia realizes. The explosion came from the training stadium, and she mounts her broom to fly down and check everything. Emi is already sitting on the floor in satisfaction, and happily says that every time he recovers, he gets better, but he replies, that's not all yet. Ignar understands it's not that easy. To please M, he needs to behave like S. He crazily asks if Emi wants more, and she joyfully says she does. Alicia, looking down on them, watches them with disgust. Igni found himself on a sandy shore. The waves rustle against the thread, and large clouds float over the water. Igni shifts his gaze forward and freezes in amazement. He hears girls arguing. In front of him stood two girls in swimsuits, a dark-haired girl with glasses, arms folded behind her head, and next to her a shorter girl with long hair braided into a plait. They were arguing about which of them Igni liked more. Igni blushed and opened his eyes wide in surprise. He could not believe his ears. Eleonora and Myra were fighting over his attention. Leonora and Myra grabbed Igny's hands from different sides. He was beaming. He liked what was happening so much that he was convinced. This is what popularity means. Someone approached the boys and ordered them to stop immediately. Yuri approached the boys. He raised his hands up, his face turning red, and irritably declared that he actually knows Igny better than anyone. Yuri's eyes filled with tears when Igny reminded him that Yuri is a boy. Yuri approached Igny and the girls, and another person appeared next to the boys. The girl with long dark hair in a swimsuit approached the boys' Elena's. Behind her, a small house made of straw and wood was visible. Elena said that she was the perfect match for Igny. Yuri and Elena started talking about who is more suitable. On Ian's day as a couple, Elena is only the first among the students, and Yuri is only Ian's classmate. Meanwhile, someone else also approached the boys. The girl with dark short hair approached the boys. She looked scary and angrily declared that she was ready to defeat everyone for Igny. Her name was Iris. Before the frightened Igny stands another girl with a headbench raised her hands up and began shouting that Igny is a liar and must answer for his words. Her name was Frenda. Frenda was pushed by a blonde who appeared out of nowhere. It was Amy. Ian got even more confused, looking at what had happened. Igny raised his hand up, sweat running down his face. The girls started arguing all over the territory about who was better suited for Ignish. Tried to calm them down, but the girls did not hear him. Igny saw several girls standing in front of him and immediately understood. This was not popularity. It was something bad. The atmosphere around the girls was heating up and darkening step by step. Igny stood on the sand. A girl in a hat appeared behind him and said that Igny had to explain everything to her. It was Alicia. Igny turned sharply, looked at her in panic, and then said that Alicia had to help him calm the girls. Alicia was in a dress with a bow on her chest and a large dark hat. She looked at Igny with disapproval and said he was behaving terribly. As soon as Igny heard Alicia's words, he opened his mouth and began to scream. He was pulled into the void. In a moment, Igny was on the floor near his own bed. Next to him was Yuri reading a book and got scared when he heard Igny fall from the bed. Yuri sat on the floor next to Igny and asked if Igny was okay. He pressed his body to the floor, with his legs on the bed. He quietly swayed in response to Yuri's question and thought he was lucky it was only a dream. Yuri smiled and said he was surprised. Igny woke up on his own. Igny replied that he apologized for disturbing her. Igny lay down on the bed again, turned his back, covered himself with a blanket, and said he would sleep a little longer. Yuri looked at Igny and shouted that he could not sleep so long. Igny turned around and said that today was a day of rest, he could sleep a little longer. Yuri approached Igny's bed and asked how he could forget that he promised to organize a training fight before the tournament. Igny opened one eye and looked at Yuri. Igny mumbled through sleep in response to Yuri that he remembered his promise. Yuri immediately started shouting that Igny had to get up, then they would go to breakfast. It was a sunny day. Next to the building where large windows stood, trees were growing. Alicia and Iris were waiting for Igny and Yuri. Igny and Yuri entered the arena and greeted the girls. Alicia held a stick in her hands and said that even someone as strong as Igny needed a training fight. Iris smiled broadly and waved her hand to the guys. Igny said that he had never trained in one-on-one duels. Alicia did not understand what exactly Igny was talking about. Igny was embarrassed. He looked away and replied that it was time to start training. He also thought his rival was always his grandfather. First, he needed to find out what level of fighting the girls had reached. Igny approached Alicia and Iris. Yuri stood near the guys and said that he would enter the fight first. The girls were a little surprised. Yuri raised his hands up and, smiling, said that he needed even more training in fighting. Yuri stood in front of Igny. They were in the arena. Alicia and Iris stepped aside and started talking. They were curious how exactly the guys would fight, since Yuri had the attribute of darkness. Yuri raised his hands in front of him and said he was ready to start the fight. A dark aura began to appear around him. The girls did not take their eyes off the guys. Iris already had sweat on her face. Igny cautiously watched Yuri's actions. Yuri rushed forward and waved his arms in different directions. As soon as he reached Iggy placed his hand on his head and this stopped Yuri. The girls stood nearby and watched everything with surprise. Yuri sat on the ground and said sadly that it seemed Igny had won this fight. Igny looked at Yuri and thought that he had done nothing at all. Igny said that Yuri needed to avoid close combat. Yuri was surprised by Igny's words. Yuri, with tears in his eyes, said that then, next time, he could help with Igny's training if he didn't mind. Alicia leaned the stick against her body and decisively declared that she was now ready to start the fight. Yuri stood next to the boys and offered to be the judge in your duel. Yuri raised his hand and said that the boys could start the training fight. After Yuri's words, Alicia flew on her broom into the air above the arena. Igny raised his leg and stepped back. Yuri and Iris stood nearby and watched the boys fight. Yuri raised his hand and said with surprise that Alicia and Igny were quite fast. Igny extended his hand forward and cast a spell. Fireballs appeared before him. He launched them into the sky straight at Alicia. She raised her hand and blocked Igni's strike. The fireballs flew past Alicia. As soon as Alicia deflected the strike, she was stunned. She did not understand where Igni had disappeared. Alicia began to circle her broom in the air in different directions, trying to find Igni. Igni appeared right behind Alicia, who was hovering in the air. She heard Finny rustling behind her. Alicia was very scared. Igni rose into the air and launched another fireball attack at Alicia, from which she fell off her broom. Alicia managed to grab the broom with her hand hung in the air. She said that Igni's fire attacks were powerless against her. While Alicia held onto the broom, an explosion occurred on the ground from Igni's attack. Alicia lay on the ground, holding the broom above her. Clouds of disaster rose into the sky from Igni's attack. She thought that his strike would reduce visibility to 0. Behind Alicia, a hand emerges from the clouds of smoke reaching out to Alicia. She feels danger behind her and is wildly frightened. It was Igni. He jumped on Alicia. With her hat, she goes away along with the broom. Another explosive wave. Among the clouds of evil, the silhouettes of the boys are visible. Igni sits on Alicia and says that this is exactly how he won the fight. Igni loomed over Alicia. She said that in battle he has good skill 7 without a trial sparring. Igni asked and was surprised. Why does Alicia think so? Igni squeezes Alicia's head in his palms. Alicia closes her eyes and turns away, then says that it is clear. Igni is agile enough to avoid injuries in battle. Alicia turns her head to the other side and says that it turns out Igni is not so interested in one-on-one duels. He trains the use of force. Alicia opens her eyes and asks how much longer Igni will stand over her like that. Igni steps back, raises the hand that was holding Alicia's head, and apologizes for what happened. Ian stood in the arena. He closed his eyes and thought that girls are so gentle they should be touched as naturally as possible. Iris stood next to Ian and said his name. Iris placed her hand on her chest and, with excitement, said that she was already ready to continue training and fighting with him. Igni nervously looked at Iris and said that she could attack however she wanted. Igni stood in front of Iris, spread her arms and legs to the sides, and was ready to start the fight. Iris cast a spell and in a moment pressed close to Ian, gently, with trembling joy. Ian sharply opened his mouth in shock and did not move. It was the heart around the boy's Iris had summoned it. In Iris's eyes, hearts were burning, and she continued to hold Igni tightly, insisting that she had trained hard especially for today, so now they were together with Igni forever. Iris continued to squeeze Ian in her arms, thought this technique only pulled opponents closer, even with the slightest resistance. Alicia conjures a summoned whirlwind in her hands. She looks angrily at the boys and unleashes the whirlwind on them. Ian and Iris break free from her attack technique and, shouting, fly away. Alicia started nervously shouting at the boys that what they were doing had nothing to do with skill training. Ian and Iris were crying. Tall trees stood in front of the building, and the windows looked directly into Ian's room. Yuri shouted that he and Ian were already late. Ian replied that now he was sleeping so sweetly. Yuri stretched out his hands to Ian, who was lying in bed covered with a blanket, and loudly barked that Ian needed to get up immediately. Today was the day of the tournament. Ian lay with his eyes closed, his head on the pillow, drool trailing from his mouth. Ian sleepily got out of bed. Without opening his eyes, he said that everything was fine. If they flew, they would reach their goal in a moment. Yuri's face turned red. He looked at Ian in surprise and did not understand what he was talking about. In a moment, Yuri's loud shout spread throughout the district. The boys sprang up. They were high above the city. A little later, the boys found themselves right in front of Iris and Alina. Iris clenched her hands and twisted her face full of fear. She did not expect the boys to appear so suddenly right in front of her. Alina stood behind Iris. Ian picked Yuri up on his back and with a smile said he was sorry. He and Yuri appeared at the very last moment and hoped they were not late. Yuri held on to Ian. The boys' sudden landing raised clouds of dust into the air. Alina raised a finger and, smiling, said that the boys were not late. The qualification was still ongoing, and the recommended opponents for the qualification tournament would be appointed later. Ian slightly lowered his gaze and tensed as soon as he heard someone calling his name from behind. Edward approached Ian, arms crossed on his chest. He smirked and said that Ian was late. Edward already thought that Ian was scared and would not come to the tournament. Ian indignantly replied that Edward came to the training camp to talk nonsense. Another boy approached Ian and said that Edward got very angry as soon as he learned about Ian's participation in the tournament, so Ian must not lose. His companion's words confused Edward. Iris approached Igni and said that Edward had already come here before her to support Igna. Igna was surprised by her words. Edward followed his friend, grumbling that he was not in the mood, and asked him not to chatter. Igni called Edward to himself. Hearing his name, Edward was sharply surprised and awkwardly looked at Igni. Igni thanked Edward for the support. Edward stood before Igni, crossed his arms on his chest, turned aside and said that Igni should be more careful. Next to Edward stood his friend with a bump on his head. Igni was surprised. The boys stood around Ian, and he asked where Alicia had gone. Iris, without hesitation, said that today Alicia most likely would not be able to come to the tournament. Igni, with a lowered gaze, recalled his first meeting with Alicia, then she said that she did not like large crowds of people. Eleanor stepped away from the boys a little and said that Ian should follow her. She would take him to the waiting hall, and the rest of the boys should take seats in the stands. Ian looked at Eleanor in surprise. Iris raised her hand and, smiling, said that she would cheer for Igni. Next to her stood Yuri and also declared that he would cheer for Igni. Eleanor took a step forward. Igni followed her. He turned to the boys and waved his hand. The boys watched him with their eyes and said goodbye in response. Eleanor and Ian walked side by side down a long and spacious corridor. Eleanor said that when she first saw what Ian could do, she was very impressed. Ian replied that he was F-rank. Eleanor walked without stopping, and it was further stated, Igni was still far from the academy, and even more so from participating in the tournament. Eleanor thought that he would have to try no less than she did, but she was only B-rank. Eleanor introduced herself, and Igni they used magic. After that, Eleanor said that she could use the same spell as Igni. Their situations were very similar. Igni closed his eyes and said that the first to win the tournament was the one who did not have A-rank, the manipulator Eleanor, and she also set the record for the shortest fight in the entire history of the tournament. Eleanor said embarrassedly that Igni was talking about her. Igni moved his hand aside and declared that he was going to set a new record. Eleanor raised her hand to her face and said that Igni was too kind. Igni was surprised to hear Eleanor's words. She said that everything turned out that way because her abilities were not appreciated. Eleanor was in high heels. She stopped and said that no matter how much she won, everyone would think, such a B-rank person cannot lose. They are too confident, and attention can be dangerous. Eleanor and Igni stood before tall doors. Eleanor continued to say that behind them was the waiting room. She wished Igni good luck. Eleanor smiled and said that she placed very great hopes on Igni, but other students must not know about it. Igni put his hands on his waist and replied that he promised to win this tournament. Eleanor placed her hand on her chest and said, even if there is no talent, persistence and work can change a lot. It is interesting whether the people of the kingdom are capable of realizing this. Igni was already standing before the door. He turned and said that everything would be fine. He promised to justify Eleanor's expectations. Eleanor raised her hand, closed her eyes, and wished Igni good luck. Igni, Imi, Frenda, and Igni's brother took the tournament very seriously. On one of the arena walls, I noticed a large poster. One of the tournament organizers flew into the microphone with the announcement that the long-awaited magic tournament had already started, and to begin with, introduced the participants of Block A. On one side of the arena stood a frowning and serious Igni. On the other a guy, Dobana. He was confident, arms crossed on his chest, and a wide smile across his mouth. In the stands around the arena, people were sitting. The organizer continued to say that the tournament rules were simple. The winner is the one who defeats the opponent. Yuri and Igres discussed their experience. Yuri and Igres noticed Alicia entering the arena stands. She was standing near one of the entrances. She wore a cloak and a hat, and she was quietly looking around. Yuri and Igres met Alicia. Igres put his hands on her back and said that Igni really needed support because Alicia came here for that very purpose. Edward stood next to the girls and looked at them suspiciously. The organizer announced the start of the fight. Igni stood in the arena, and opposite him was Dobana, who rested his sword on his shoulder. Dobana asked with a smile if Igni was studying at Rollmud Academy. Igni closed his eyes and answered yes, he was a freshman. Dobana pushed off with one foot, then raised his sword and rushed into attack. Dobana said that Igni was most likely talented, and that was very good. In a moment, Dobana noticed Igni ahead. He raised his hand up above his palm. A huge fireball flared. Dobana instantly froze in place, not yet having finished the attack. Dobana began to tremble with fear. His mouth was open. He did not understand what was happening now. A dark atmosphere rose around Igni. He burst out shouting, "What does talented mean?" Igni raised his other hand above himself. His face was not visible. Igni said that he fully understood Dobana's feelings. Dobana, in response, trembled with fear and said that he did not understand what Igni was talking about. Wasn't he talented? Igni stood still and did not lower his hands. He said he understood Dobana. Probably it was good that he had to be born handsome, but Dobana did not understand what Igni was talking about. He trembled with fear and tried to cover his body with his hand. Ian began to shout fiercely that no matter how hard he tried, he never managed to fix his appearance. Dobana, trembling, threw himself into the water surrounding the arena. Igni still held his hands above himself and shouted wildly. Dabina's jump into the pool raised a whole column of water into the air. Ian turned his back to Dabina, who fell into the pool, and the organizer announced that one of the duelists was in the water, so Ian won. The tournament passed without incidents. Igni, Emi, Frenda, and Igni's brother, each of the boys passed the test without problems, and it all ended with their victory. The spectators in the stands were chatting and shouting. Orjazer announced a fight between two semi-finalists from Block A. Igni defeated his opponents with a fireball, and his friend used clever magic. The organizer further stated that the rest of the participants in Block A and B belonged to Role Mod Academy. This was to be expected from a gifted generation. Igni looked away and thought that Frey was also on the list of winners. Frenda stood in front of Igni. She raised her hands and said that no one could have thought they would fight each other. Igni agreed with her words. She was serious and did not take her eyes off Igni. The organizer announced the start of the battle. Frenda began jumping and waving her hands on the spot. She cheerfully said that her attribute was water and that she had a rank, a natural enemy of Igni. Water appeared around Frenda. A column of water appeared next to Igni. It shrinks from the friend's attack. While Igni shrinks, he says he disagrees with the friend's words and then freezes in place. Frenda launches her water attack and it hits Igni. Everything around her is blurred by water. The girls watch the battle, and Yuri says that Frenda's attack hit Igni from behind. Iris sees Frenda's attack and is scared for Igni. Frenda straightened up, looked ahead, and shuddered with surprise. In front of her stood Ian. He was smiling and said that her attack did not reach him. Frenda raised her hand and nervously said how her water evaporated so quickly. Frenda's face froze in panic, and she nervously said that Igni cannot just take her magic with a fireball. Igni stretches out his hand in front of him and launches a fire attack at his friend. Frenda was scared. She did not expect such a sudden attack from Igni. Frenda raises her hand and casts a spell. A large protective wall of water rises before her. Frenda puts her hands in front of her. Sweat runs down her face. She thought she could no longer hold the wall. She would have to resort to another spell. Frenda waves one hand. Frenda raised one hand and lowered it. A water whirlwind flared above her. A gust of wind tousled her clothes in the air. Yuri and Alicia watched the fight. She said that Frenda's magic is colossal in size, incredibly powerful. Not every adult can handle it. Frenda raised her hand and said she asks Ian for forgiveness but will make him surrender. Ian was a little scared. He replied that he was surprised how Frenda could do such things. She is truly impressive. Frenda began casting a spell. Water surrounded her from all sides. Frenda said that Igni is doomed to lose anyway. Frenda raised her hand and said she is ready to easily close any gap. Water pillars shot upwards. Frenda looked where Igni was standing and noticed that he had disappeared. Igni's hand appeared behind Frenda. Igni fires a volley at his friend. She dodges to the side and shouts that she doesn't understand how Igni ended up behind her. Frenda found herself in the pool surrounding the arena. The organizer began to say that the fight was declared over and Igni won. Igni stands in front of the pool and arena and bursts with joy at his victory. The scene shifts to the waiting room. Igni sits on a bench, hands folded between his legs. Someone calls Igni. He sharply turns his head and looks to the side in surprise. Emmy stands in front of Igni near the door and says that she fought Frey and lost to him. Emmy continued to say that she probably needs to train magic more often. The word magic causes an unpleasant feeling in her. Igni was shocked by what Emmy said. Emmy looked ahead and said she came to the waiting hall to support Ian and that she will cheer for him to win. From another room, the boys' conversation in the reception could be heard. Emmy froze in place, and Igni headed to the fighting arena. He looked at Emmy and said he was very grateful for the support and would definitely win this match. People in the stands raised a roar and shouted. The organizer announced, only one fight remains. It will be between Frey, who possesses the greatest attribute of light and has rank CC, and Igni, who wields fireballs and has rank F. Igni twitched when he heard that the girl fans supported Frey, while only the boys supported him. Igni's face darkened, and he thought that Frey was much more popular than him. Igni, looking at Frey with anger, thought, when he defeats Frey, he will take all his popularity. Frey stood before Igni with his head lowered. Frey rushed to Ian and said he did not understand how Ian could have ended up among the victors at all. Ian replied that he did not understand what answer Frey wanted to hear from him. Ian was here because he had great strength. Frey began to look angrily at Igni and said that he had little power, he could only cast fireballs. Igni replied that it was precisely because of using fireballs that he had mastered this skill perfectly. Frey got angry as soon as he heard Ian's confident words. He began to insist that a person like Ian would never master magic perfectly. The organizer announced the start of the duel. Frey suddenly casts a spell and attacks Igni. Igni raises his hand in front of him to defend himself. Frey closes his eyes after the attack, and clouds of dust rise into the air throughout the arena. The organizer says that Frey already uses such powerful attacks at the very beginning of the fight, but his strike never reached the target. Frey, hearing the organizer's words, was very surprised. He flares around himself, but does not understand how his attack could have missed Igni. At that very moment, Igni appears behind Frey. A fiery ball appears in Igni's palm. It grows, fueled by magic, and heads towards Frey. Seeing the threat, Frey is frightened. Igni began to smile and said that magical dispersion is high-level protective magic. Frey stood before Igni, lowered his hands and head, and then agreed with her words. In a moment, Frey was overwhelmed with rage, began shouting that he was a genius and that he was very different from Igni. Frey stretched out his hands in front of him and started casting a spell. Frey stretched out his hands in front of him and cast a spell. A magical laser pierced Igni, and an explosive flash occurred. Frey lunged at the side where Igni stood. He began hitting her but missed every time. Igni skillfully closed the distance after each of his attacks. Frey shouted, "Why can't he hit after all? His magic has the speed of light." The events shift to 2 years ago. Een and his grandfather are in a large stone cave. Grandfather Een says he intends to tell Een something that will help him become stronger in the future. Ignis stretched out his hands forward, turned to the side where his grandfather stood, and said that grandfather intends to tell him about great buffers. Grandfather Igni replied that he does not understand what thoughts are filling Igni's head. Igni looked at his grandfather with surprise as soon as he heard his words. He was going to tell Igni something that would be useful in the battle with the Lord of Light magic, and it concerned speed. Grandfather Igni was in a suit with a cloak. He looked ahead and said that light magic is not so easy to see. One must learn to see the entire aura. This is the highest level of spiritual vision. Grandfather looked at Igni and said that besides increasing magical power and leveling up, Igni needs to infuse the magic of the speed of light. Igni stepped back, stunned by his grandfather's words. Igni began to smile nervously and said that, as he expected from light magic, it is terrifying and has incredible speed. During the current training, he almost died several times, and now he also needs to practice spiritual vision. Grandfather stretched out his hand and began to rage at the top of his voice. Igni calls this persistence. If he becomes the strongest, he will definitely become the most popular. Een's face was covered with drops of sweat. He began mumbling something under his breath, something unintelligible. Then he suddenly raised his hands, and with a joyful face, exclaimed that he agreed with his grandfather's words. Grandfather replied that it was good that Een was so obedient. The events moved to the tournament arena. Igni broke through after another hit from Frey. Igni thought that he had been reaching the highest limit of light for 2 years. Every day he trained to exhaustion. Igni clenched his teeth and frowned. Frey stretched his hand forward and continued hitting Igni, while Igni skillfully dodged all his brother's attacks. Een turned around and shouted that he could see. Frey can't even reach his grandfather's little finger. Frey raised his hand and also shouted for Een to stop bothering him. Oro sat in the carved chair, and behind him stood 2 people in dark mantles. He saw Igni in the arena and began nervously talking about how Igni ended up in the arena and even reached the final, because his talent is F-rank fire. Oro jumped up and tensed as soon as he heard behind him. Supposedly, Igni has no talent, only skill. A man in a long robe appears at the doorway and begins to speak. Ability only shows the direction of the gift, not talent. Oro still does not see the difference between talent and ability. Arl asked what Lux was doing here. Lux appeared and asked why Oro does not call him father. Lax approached Oro and said he came to the tournament to see how his grandchildren are having fun after all. He himself raised Igni. Oro glanced at Lax and frowned. An evil smile appeared on Oro's face and he roared that Lax was mistaken. No matter how much you train a person with an F rank, they will still lose, and victory will go to the geniuses of Frey, the owner of the CC rank. Frey raised his hand up. A dark atmosphere thickened around him. He said this would put an end to their fight with Igni. Lianer looked forward and said she was seeing Frey in such despair for the first time. The girls from Yuri watched the boys fight and whispered. Supposedly, Frey wants to perform an attack called Aurora 1 capable of covering a large area. Frey raised his hand and immediately extended it forward. He said he would use the spell of Dawn Light. This magic belonged only to him. It was unlike Igni's fiery balls. Frey intended to put an end to Igni. Frey held his hand in front of him. Igni raised his hand and a fireball flared above it. Igni declared he was not going to retreat and would go on a frontal assault. Frey and Igni were too focused. They simultaneously cast their strongest spells, and a powerful explosion sounded throughout the arena. Mighty explosion thundered across the entire arena. Smoke and flames covered everything around. The girls and Yuri were frightened by what was happening. 2 figures appeared in the arena. They were hard to make out through the dust rising in the air. One boy stood in the arena, and the other hovered in the air. The smoke slowly cleared, and Igni stood in the arena, extending his hand. The entire arena space sees. Igni stands in the center, unharmed, and clouds of dust slowly disperse. Oro, through clenched teeth, stared at the arena in it. Where Frey fell, defeat was now visible. Frey throws the ball into the pool surrounding the arena. The organizer announces Een's victory. The stands roar. Een stands in the arena, one hand raised up and the other held on his waist. Oro rises from his chair and lets out a furious scream. This cannot be. Primrose Frey, who held the rank CC, lost. Sweat streamed down Aro's face and he was furious. Lux stood behind him. He closed his eyes and said that Frey's talent was truly incredible, but he did not know how to apply it. Luck recalled their training with Een. He continued to insist. Among his peers, Frey was the best in versatility, but he could not compare to the mastery of a single weapon, and in ranged attacks he was inferior to Een. Lux stood before Oro and continued to insist that he only sees the first flower. Lux cannot entrust him with his grandchildren. Oro values his sons as tools. Oro became angry and began shouting that Lux has no right to teach him. A sinister smile appeared on Oro's face. He raised his hands up and spoke angrily that Frey lost, but Igni did not. With Igni, he could obtain the first light. Lux stood behind Oro and began to say that Oro could not think. His words would one day come true. Lux did not think that Igni would want to return. Oro cut Lux off and ordered him to be silent. Oro slammed the door right in front of his face. Battle participants took their pedestals. Igni won first place. He raised his hand and greeted the fans. The stands exploded with joy at his victory. A girl with light brown hair approached Igni. She held something in her hands and smiled. She said she congratulated Igni on his victory and that he must accept his winnings. Igni looked at his winnings with surprise. Igni snatched the object from the boy's hands and asked what he had finally won. The girl replied that it was a catalyst ring. The girl continued to poke, saying that this ring was specially made for the tournament. They say that whoever wears it can throw 3 times stronger. Igni clenched the ring in his hand, from which light was pouring, and was glad to hear this. Igni held the ring in his hands, then looked at the girl and thanked her for the gift. Then he pressed it next to himself, bowed his head, and then turned aside and stopped in surprise. He heard someone calling him. Igni called Frey, and without raising his head, said that Igni is strong. He could not say that about himself. Igni replied that victory is not that important, but Frey still took second place and should be proud. Frey shook Kulan's hand and said that he is Primrose, so he finished in second place. Igni looked at Frey and said, to reach the first light, the tournament does not matter at all. Why is Frey so obsessed with the first light? Frey replied that his obsession with the first light was born from his father's wishes. Igni turned away, then closed his eyes and said that Frey must be honest because he himself wants that. Frey stood nearby and did not raise his head. Igni drove the girls out and led Yuri outside to the fountain. The boys congratulated Igni on winning the tournament. Alicia stood behind him and smiled. Igni approached Alicia and, smiling, said that she also came to watch the organization of the tournament. Alicia began to smile broadly and replied that she congratulates Igni on winning the tournament. Alina approached Igni and Alicia. She put her palms together and with a smile on her face said that she wants to suggest to the boys to celebrate Igni's victory. Igni replied that he agrees, and they even paid him money as for a win. Edward approached the boys from behind. He put his hands on his waist and cheerfully said that he intends to pay what he cannot afford so as not to celebrate at the expense of the tournament winner. Edward raised his hand and said that he had already prepared a suitable place for the winner. Igni stood nearby and looked at Edward in surprise. Igni lost in his mind the words of Edward that he had prepared a worthy stake for the winner. Igni imagined sitting in a large armchair, holding a glass, surrounded on all sides by many beauties. Igni raised his hand, was about to say something with a smile but didn't have time. He heard someone calling him. He turned and saw his father Oro, walking towards him on the stone road. Oro said with a smile on his face that he had finally found Een. Een looked at her father in surprise and did not understand what he was doing here. Igni closed his eyes and said he would be late and the boys should go without him. The boys obediently agreed with Igni and moved on. Oro stood before Igni and began shouting that he had witnessed the fight between him and Frey in the arena. Igni thanked his father for this. Oro approached Igni and grabbed his hands. Oro leaned over Igni and said that now Igni was the one worthy of the first light. Oro held Igni by the shoulders. Igni was extremely surprised by the broken words he heard. He did not understand what his father was talking about. Oro kept insisting that the magic of Igni completely destroyed Frey. This shocked Oro. It seems to be the highest magic. Igni took his father's hand and said that his father was wrong. He won only thanks to his abilities' control of Fireball. Oro listened to Igni's words in surprise. Aro's face darkened. He said he understood everything. Igni was hiding the secret of his Victorian that was right. Igni replied that his father was wrong and there was no secret to his victory. Igni looked at his father and thought, there is no swearing in his words, but Igni did not understand at all what his father was talking about. Oro said with a smile on his face that he wants Igni to be able to return already. Igni was very surprised. He smiled and asked where exactly he could return to. Oro raised his hands. His face became terrifying and said, Een can return to the Turquoise family. If he agrees, then he will become the pride of their lineage. Oro stood opposite Igni, and next to them was a fountain. Igni placed his hands on his hips and asked if he could become noble again. His father replied that Igni was right. Doesn't he think this is a very advantageous offer? Igni sighed heavily and lowered his head, then replied that he had no intention of agreeing to the conditions set by his father. Oro was surprised that he did not understand why Igni refused. Igni frowned and said he saw no point in agreeing to Oro's proposal. Behind his back, the fountain and trees rumbled. Horror showed on Oro's face as soon as he heard Igni's words about having to face strict upbringing and a bunch of noble formalities again. It was unbearable for him. Igni turned his back to his father and walked away. Oro panicked. He reached out to Igni and said that Igni had to stop, but Oro did not manage to finish speaking. He was jolted when someone placed a hand on his shoulder. Oro turned his head and saw Lux behind him. Lux glanced at Oro and said that Igni had already answered. He did not like what Oro was saying. Igni noticed his grandfather and joyfully called him over. Oro pushed Lux aside, spread his arms, and started shouting that Lux should not interfere because he himself had refused Igni. Lux shouted back that the rules of popularity are the rules of a person's life. Lux turned to Igni and asked him to name popularity rule number 15. Igni automatically replied that rule 15 says, "You must not be called a woman." Beads of sweat ran down Oro's face. His teeth clenched tightly as soon as he heard Lux's words, that Igni was right and that he knew this condition very well. But did Oro himself know the rule? Oro approached Igni and placed a hand on his shoulder. He leaned over Igni and said that Lux was talking nonsense. Igni could become the pride of their family. This was his only chance to become noble again. Oro wanted to continue, but Lux interrupted him and asked Igni to name popularity rule number 20. Igni immediately replied, "The rule is to love your enemy as yourself." Lux stepped back and said that Igni was right. If you love them as yourself, then you cannot hate people. Oro grabbed Igni by the shoulder and growled that Lux must immediately shut up because he was speaking directly to Igni. Lux does not listen to Oro and continues to question Een about the rules. Een answers all his grandfather's questions. Then Lux, with a smile on his face, says that Oro will never obey these rules. Oro glanced at Lux with a heavy look. Oro's face changed. He began to smile as soon as he heard Igni's words, that he should not be so angry. Igni was already very grateful to him for many things, most of all for Oro having driven Igni away. But just then, Oro's face darkened again. Een began to smile broadly and said that he was grateful to his father for freeing him. At that moment, Een wanted to say goodbye to his father. Oro's face twisted sharply into a terrible expression. He headed towards Een and began to say that he did not understand, while Een was babbling something wrong. Lux stood behind Oro and listened, when suddenly a noise sounded. Lux grabs Oro by the hands and tells Igni that he must not hesitate. He needs to leave. Quicklight guys are already waiting for him. Oro looks at Lux with fear. Igni turns around and agrees with his grandfather's words. Oro could not break free from Lux's grip, snapped at the panic screams and begged. Inji must stop. He pleaded for him to return. Oro raised his hand in front of him and watched as Inji rushed forward to his friends. The boys were in a hall with high ceilings. They sat at a round table. Alicia was without a hat. She looked at the boys and began to tell what she thought. They would go to a prestigious restaurant, but it turned out to be an ordinary place. On the table were salads and various seafood. Yuri, smiling, said that the food looked very tasty. Edward replied, "At times like these, it's better to eat in crowded places. The food here is really delicious, so the guys can relax peacefully." Igni sat at the table. His hands were on the tabletop, and he seemed to be glowing. He thought that in this establishment, he had not seen a single girl without clothes. Next to Igni sat Alicia, looking at him. She asked why Igni was behaving so strangely. Edward's escort pointed forward and said that Igni should be grateful after all. Edward poured his heart and soul into finding the establishment. Suddenly, Edward's mouth dropped open in surprise. Edward slapped his friend's cheeks and asked him not to say such things anymore. The companion jumped up, put his hands on his head, and said as if tears were welling up in his eyes, expected Edward to praise him. Alinar said that the boys looked very friendly. The boys took their mugs and put them together. Edward said that today is a holiday, so the boys can eat properly. The boys were sitting at the table, and one of them asked how Een managed to become so strong. Een was drinking from a mug and slammed it down on the table. Igni raised his hand to his face and looked threateningly at the boys. Then he said that he gained such strength through persistence. Yuri raised his hands. Alicia was sitting nearby. Their faces shone with delight. Igni looked at them and smiled, then thought that he was pleased to see such faces on the boys. Later, Iris begins to hug Alicia. Alicia looks at Iris in surprise. Then Iris asks Alicia to show her some trick. Alicia agrees to Iris's request and some object appears in her hands. Alicia stretches out her hand with cards in front of her and says that she can predict everyone's fate, that she, the brilliant Alicia, can tell the children about their future. Iris touches her face with her hand and laughs, saying that cataclysm magic is the perfect option for Alicia. Alicia looks at Iris in surprise. She does not understand what she is talking about. Alicia suggests going to Een for fortune-telling. Een is a little surprised by this proposal. Alicia stands by the table, and all the other boys are sitting. Igni raises a finger and asks Alicia if she can check whether they will gather in one group in 10 years. Alicia agrees to answer Igni's question. Alicia lays out several cards face down in front of her and cheerfully says that in 10 years they will look exactly like this. Then she shows one of the cards. It has a skull and crossbones with a sharp scythe. Alicia turns the card toward herself and gazes at the image on it. Yuri begins to tremble with fear, and tears appear in his eyes. Iris shifts her gaze to Alicia. A gloomy silence covers the girls and Yuri. Then the boy began to shout and argue that Alicia cannot be trusted because she is wrong and will try to tell fortunes again. His shouts could be heard on the street. On the roof of the building opposite the place where the boys were celebrating, a strange figure of a man stood tall. He wore a black cloak, and his face was impossible to see. He looked ahead and said that he had finally found Alicia. Alicia stood on an open rocky area. She raised her head. In her hands, Alicia held a broom. She wore a hat on her head. Around her lay soldiers. They did not move. Near Alicia's feet lay one of the soldiers. Her broom was stained with something. Behind Alicia stood a man. She did not know who he was. It was Lux. He approached Alicia and said that he was the one annoyed by the child's tears. Alicia turned sharply. Her face was gloomy. She replied that this was a battlefield and there were no children here, and she wondered if Lux was her enemy. Lux stretched out his hand to the side and said that he was neither an enemy nor a friend. He came to fulfill a promise he made to an old friend and to free Alicia. Alicia stood with her back to Lux. She looked at him without turning around. Lux handed Alicia a paper with a coat of arms and a few lines of text. He said, if Alicia does not want to accept his help now, she should take this paper. Alicia turned to Lux and asked what this paper was. Lux held the paper in front of him and said that it was an exam form for Romud Magic School, one of the magical schools of the kingdom. Alicia turned and replied that she was not interested. Alicia stopped as soon as she heard Lux say, if she goes to the school, she will be able to make friends. Alicia lowered her head and, without turning to Lux, pondered his words. Lux repeated again that Alicia would really be able to find friends there, among whom there would be one boy. Alicia wakes up, tears flow down her cheeks. The dream breaks off. Alicia approaches the window with bars. She stands opposite and says that she had a dream. She lies down in bed as soon as she returns. Alicia's eyes flash. An idea immediately comes to her. Outside it was already night, and the windows of the building began to light up one by one. Igni and Yuri sat in their room. Yuri sat on the bed and smiled, saying that today was a fun day. Igni took off his outerwear and agreed with Yuri. Igni recalled the events of that day, how he ended up in Alina's arms. That was exactly how she pushed him to win the tournament. Iris stood nearby, dissatisfied. Igni thought he would never forget this moment and wanted these embraces to last forever. Yuri sat on the bed and said that Igni was not tired at all after the fight in the arena. Igni turned to Yuri, raised his hand, and declared the same. He was not tired at all. Igni began to smile and said that he was really cool. Yuri sat on the bed and, smiling, said that he also wanted to become as brave as Igni. Igni looked at Yuri with surprise and thought that he was not brave at all, he just wanted to succeed. Outside it was dark and it started to rain. There was a table in front of the window. Yuri said that there was a storm outside the window. Een stood in front of Yuri, looked out the window, and then said that the weather had spoiled too quickly because it had been so sunny. Yuri raised his hand and said that sometimes the storm sneaks up on him unnoticed. It can start when a dragon flies over the city or when someone uses cataclysm magic. In a moment, Yuri jerked forward and realized what he had just said. Yuri suddenly runs up with Igni, starts hugging and shouting with delight. Igni is scared and does not understand what is happening. Yuri points aside, his hand trembling with fear. Igni asks Yuri what happened to him. Yuri pointed at the window. Igni was standing with his back to him, and behind the glass a dark silhouette appeared. Yuri shouted that there was someone outside the window. Igni and Yuri looked at the window in fright. It was Alicia. She was standing in front of the window, and the rain was pouring down on her from above. Alicia shouted loudly for that boy to help her hide. The boys led Alicia into the room. She sat on a chair. They gave her a mug with a hot drink. Igni said that they needed to find a change of clothes for Alicia. Yuri replied, this is a men's dormitory. She has to behave quietly. Igni said that his clothes would not fit Alicia. Yuri climbed into the wardrobe and said he would lend Alicia his. As soon as they arrived in the village, he was given women's clothes. Igni stood behind. He was surprised to hear Yuri's words. Alicia sat on the chair and looked at the boys with a smile. The boys were discussing Yuri's clothes. Yuri was holding a dress in his hands, and Igni was standing nearby. Alicia broke the silence and said she was very grateful to the boys. Igni replied that Alicia should not thank them for this because they are friends. Yuri agreed with Igni's words. Alicia, sitting on the chair, became a little worried. Behind her was a window through which the rain was pouring. Noticing that Alicia had become sad, the boys looked at each other, then approached her. She put her mug on the floor and lowered her head. Igni asked what was bothering her. Alicia raised her hand and said that everything was fine. In a moment, the wall in the boys' room collapses. A blonde woman in armor enters their room, holding a large sword. She stops and says that she has finally found Alicia. Alicia sits on the floor, her body trembling with fear. The The stranger says that she never thought Alicia would dare to use cataclysm magic again. On Alicia's face is pure horror. She realized that standing before her was her sister. Alicia sat on the floor, her hat lying nearby, and her sister stood before her holding a sword in her hands. In the room, pieces of a destroyed wall lay scattered on the floor. Alicia's sister said they needed to return home. Igni approached his sister Alicia and shouted that everyone must stay in their places, and the girl must explain who she is. A blonde girl in armor, holding a sword, said that her name was Celia Esmeralda. She was the first princess of the Esmeralda Empire. Igni and Yuri were very surprised by Celia's words. The boys stood next to Alicia, who was sitting on the floor. Celia stood in front of them. Behind her in the wall was a hole through which the street was visible. Yuri asked if this was the same immortal Celia. Igni turned to Yuri. How does he know her? She is actually very beautiful. Yuri raised his hand and said it was strange that Igni still did not know who she was. Celia is the support of life. Celia looked intently at the boys. Igni imagined how Celia was chained, and she does not submit to anyone. Igni thought that she was like a pillar and also a princess knight. Alicia stood up, holding her hat in her hands. Celia approached her and said she had come here for her younger sister needed to go home. Alicia took the hat in her hands, lowered her head, and said sadly that she did not want to go with her sister and no longer intended to harm people. Yuri and Igni were stunned by what they heard. Alicia raised her hands and cried out pleadingly that Igni must save her. Igni approached Alicia and hurled a fire attack toward Celia. She held a sword in front of her. Igni thought he had to save the girl in trouble. Igni raised one hand and held Alicia by the back with the other. The shot raised clouds of gunpowder into the air. Igni brought Alicia to Yuri and said they must flee immediately. Yuri did not know exactly where to run, and Alicia was trembling with fear. Alicia held her hat with one hand, and Yuri took Alicia's free hand. Igni stood by the ruined wall and called to Yuri that they needed to call the teachers here. Yuri replied that they would do just that. Igni stood in the room near the ruined wall and looked out the window. Celia tried to get up and said that no spell had thrown her back like that for a long time. Igni jumped out of the hole in the wall and landed on the ground. Igni stood before Celia. Celia said that she knew who Igni was. He was the winner of the tournament. Igni put his hand on his belt and replied that Celia had indeed been at the tournament. Igni remembered the moment when he and Alicia talked during the tournament. Then he asked if Celia found Alicia at the tournament. Celia replied that Igni was right, it was just a coincidence because she was watching him. Celia stood before Igni and said that if Igni did not want to get into trouble, he should not meddle with her. Igni replied that it seemed to him that Alicia did not want to go home together with Celia. Celia held the sword in front of her and said threateningly that she did not care, she had no right to choose. She did not understand why Igni was trying to stop her. Celia just wanted to take her sister home. Igni sharply replied that he is doing it because Alicia asked him to help. Celia said that she is part of Alicia's family. How can Igni allow himself to interfere in their family's affairs? Igni remembered his father and grandfather. Then he said, Celia talks about family, but family can be both a support and an enemy. Celia raised her sword before her and, smiling, said that from Igni's words it was clear he already had experience with family talks, but Celia intended to remove Igni from her path. Igni replied that he was not going to lose to Celia. The sky was gloomy and the rain did not stop. Celia said that Een might not have heard, she is the support of life, but she warned him again for his own good. Een was not going to back down. Celia closed her eyes and accepted Een's answer. Celia lunges at Igni with a rapier in her hands, but Igni manages to dodge her strike and hangs in the air. Een stood on the ground. Celia turned and walked to Een, saying she was surprised. Een managed to dodge her strike. He truly deserved the title of victor. Een listened to Celia and thanked her for what she said. Igni raised his finger and several fireballs flared above him. Then Igni said it was his turn to attack. He charged into the attack and an incredibly huge explosion thundered. After the attack, Igni became alert. From the side behind his back appeared Celia. She struck Igni with a sword and said that he was truly strong. She had underestimated him. Celia again makes a sword swing forward. Celia finished the strike and raised her gaze. Igni hovered above her in the air. His legs were burning, and in his hands trembled that fiery sphere. The rain did not stop. Celia looked up again and asked, "Did Igni rise into the air thanks to the fireball?" The fireball flared in Igni's hands. A smile appeared on his face. Then Igni raised his hand, and from it a pillar of flame began to rise into the sky. Igni said that the fireball could be used not only for attacks, but Celia did not understand what he was going to do. Igni raises a fiery attack. A bright flash spreads across the entire area. Igni's fire strike hits the target exactly. Igni falls to the ground. Celia lies nearby not far from him. She leans on her sword and tries to get up. Celia says that now she understands. Igni summoned lightning with the fireball and then rose into the air to assess possible damage. Celia got to her feet. Her face was battered, but she still kept saying that she admired Igni's abilities. Igni looked at Selena with fear. Her face returned to its former appearance. He thought that she was able to heal all wounds in a moment, and now he finally understood what Pillar of Life means. Celia looked at Igni, smiled, and said that the indivisible Igni decided to help Alicia only because she asked. In reality, she is not what Igni seems. Igni replied that every girl needs to have a mystery. Celia said excitedly that Alicia had hurt many people. Ian stood before Celia and answered that he was not interested. Celia was surprised by Ian's response. Igni shouted that the past cannot be changed, so one must move on no matter what Celia says. Alicia will still remain Igni's friend. Celia raised her dream again and declared, if Igni does not retreat, she intends to defeat him. Igni stretched out his hand forward, and several fireballs appeared before him. Celia stood before him, took a fighting stance, and was ready for Igni's attack. At some point, Alicia appears behind Igni. She asks Igni to stop. Igni freezes in surprise. Igni holds his hand in front of him and turns to Alicia. She continues to insist that she agrees with Celia and will return home with her. Igni is shocked by what he hears from Alicia's lips. Alicia froze motionless. Behind her stood two guards who aimed their weapons at Yuri. Yuri got up and apologized to Igni. Tony lowered his hand and turned his back, suppressing his voice, meaning Celia did not come here alone. Celia also lowered her weapon and stood behind Igni. Alicia approached Celia and said that she acted meanly when she took Yuri hostage. It was a sign of weakness. Celia replied that she did not think so. The end justifies the means. Yuri, the guards, and Alicia moved toward the breach in the brick wall. Celia caught up with them and began to hurry them along. Igni put his hand on his belt and started shouting for Celia to immediately release Yuri. Celia closed her eyes and without stopping said that Igni should not worry. As soon as they board, she will release Yuri. Yuri must return tomorrow. Alicia went ahead and without turning, said she apologized to the guys for getting them into trouble. Igni rushed to Alicia and asked if she was really satisfied with everything that was happening. Alicia turned to Igni, smiled, and said she was grateful to him for everything, after which she said goodbye to him. The rain continued to pour, and Igni stood in the passage between the fence and watched as the carriage drove off into the distance. Igni raised his head and said he was curious what his grandfather or the elemental pillar would have done in his place. Tony's eyes flashed, and he said their actions would be obvious. Igni raised his hand above it, a fireball flared up. Igni releases a fireball into the sky and says that he intends to properly punish Celia for her actions. The clouds part over Igni and a view of the starry sky opens up. He smiles and says that the pillar of popularity, the one who is strong, is popular, and that he is very strong. Then Igni tears off and rushes to the carriage that is left. The chariot with the boys was rushing down the road. Its wheels sank into puddles and water splashed in all directions. Alicia sat hugging her legs next to Yuri. In the other corner of the chariot was Celia. She said why Alicia had visited the tournament. Celia closed one eye and kept insisting that Alicia knew Celia would also be at the tournament. Alicia, without raising her head, replied that she knew about her sister's presence at the tournament. Alicia hugged her knees with her hands, then turned around and said that this was her first friendly match. Yuri sat next to her and stared at Celia. Celia was amazed. Alicia had a friend. Alicia looked at Celia and said that what is happening is unfair. Celia is much freer than her, and she is always allowed more than Alicia. Celia turned and replied that Alicia was mistaken. When she had just started learning magic, everyone laughed at her. No one believed she would succeed. Alicia stared at her sister sharply. Celia slightly lowered her head and continued. Now she knew that the chatter of others was a lie. She could take Alicia with her because Alicia was too weak. Alicia looked at Celia in surprise. Alicia put her hand on her leg and smiled. Emmy really is selenium, but he lacks confidence. Alicia hugged her legs again, and without raising her head, quietly asked Celia for her words about confidence. Celia replied that Njai lacks the hoarseness to sacrifice a person, does not have the strength to betray a friend. Alicia lowered her hands. She and Yuri anxiously stared at Celia. In a moment, Alicia approached Celia and hit her. Celia was extremely shocked by her sister's action. Alicia shuddered, grabbed her chest with her hand, and shouted that Celia has no right to mock Igni. This is not courage, but cowardice. Yuri put his hands on Alicia's shoulders and said she needs to calm down. Alicia's face darkened and she thought. She had just heard Celia's words, and it seemed strange to hear such from Alicia, for she had already maimed too many. Alicia lowered her hands and covered her face with a hat. She thought she was not a war machinist, just wanted to be a princess. Someone suddenly raised their hand, and the cart with the boys stopped. Celia looked at this turn of events in surprise. Alicia turned around and asked why the cart stopped. Someone again in the port. Celia didn't have time to finish speaking. Someone cuts the tarp on the cart, and then an explosion roars. In a moment, Igni landed on his feet, holding Yuri and Alicia to his chest. He said he apologized for being late. Yuri and Alicia froze as soon as they saw Igni. Alicia noticed something strange. Igni does not let go of Alicia and Yuri. he jerks to the side, signaling the boys to run. Celia stood near the torn tent of the wagon and looked up. Igni led the boys into the forest. They reached a small clearing. Igni stretched out his hand forward and said that he and Mrs. Alina would hold Celia and the others, and Yuri and Alicia needed to leave immediately. Yuri agreed with Igni. Igni stopped and looked at Alicia, while she said she no longer intended to burden the boys with anything. Igni interrupts Alicia and asks why she behaves that way. Alicia shouted that the boys would never defeat her sister under any circumstances. Dignit grabs Alicia by the shoulders and shouts that the most important thing for them now is what she wants. Alicia froze motionless in surprise. Igni loomed over Alicia and said threateningly that she must make a decision here and now, either listen to the call of her own heart or obediently follow her sister. Alicia calmed down with her hat, covered her face, and began to say something unclear in fragments. Then she looked at Igni, tears stood in her eyes, and she said that she needed Igni's help, he must save her. Igni raised his fist in front of him and cheerfully replied that he would do everything as Alicia wished. Next to the boys, the rustle of footsteps sounded. Celia jumped out of the bushes toward the boys, in her hands a sword. She rushed at them and declared that her patience was over. Igni held Alicia by the shoulders. Alicia was mortally afraid of her sister's attack. A few centimeters from the boys, Celia hung in the air, holding the sword in front of her. Around the boys appeared a large magical sign with symbols. Celia shouted that this was a teleportation circle or a mirror of movement. Myra was sitting on one of the branches. Alina and Yuri were standing near the tree. Myra raised a finger and closed one eye, after which, smiling, she said that Celia was right, her spell would work on all three. Myra looked at the boys and, smiling, further stated that they had a time limit, 1 hour. She hopes that during this time the boys will be able to figure everything out, and in turn, Igni must protect the princess. Igni manages to say that Myra can trust him. After that, the boys disappear into the portal that Myra created. Yuri looks at the smiling Alina and asks where exactly they sent the boys. Maria Myra leads the boys to a sandy area. Alina tells Yuri that they transferred the boys to a place where they can overcome the pillar. Celia finds herself on the ground. She shifts her gaze to Igni and Alicia. They are hovering in the air. Igni said that they were carried into the Gargant Desert. This is the border of the demon lands. Here they cannot interfere with anyone. Celia stood with her hands lowered. Igni said that he considers Celia the strongest mage. Even if he retreated from this fact, he could not go back and say that he lost to the Imperial. Alicia hugged Igni, and he continued to insist that he would defeat Celia, and as a reward for his victory, he would make Celia forget about Alicia. Igni and Alicia were in the air. Igni stretched out his hand forward and rushed to attack Celia, shouting that his plan was flawless. Celia raised her sword up and began to fend off Igni's attacks. Exclaiming that Igni should not be arrogant, she still was not going to lose. His attacks would not prove effective against her anyway. Celia frowned. A gloomy atmosphere thickened around her, and she said that Igni was already annoying her. A fast horse is good only when it has legs. Celia attacks. She takes off into the air and strikes at Igni's legs. Igni is terribly frightened and clenches his teeth. Igni holds Alicia in his arms and shouts the word fire. Because of Celia's attack, Igni has no legs. Celia is standing on the ground. She lowered her sword and said that Igni really created legs from fire. Igni held Alicia in his arms. His legs were burning. Smoke was coming from the wounds. Alicia was very afraid. She was worried about Igni's condition. Celia looked at Igni and said that he was really smart. Igni was lying on the ground and still holding Alicia in his embrace. After that, he said, it doesn't hurt a trifle he had experienced more than once. Alicia, in Igni's arms, began to shout that he needed to forget about her. Celia could restore his legs. Igni needed to leave her. Bitter tears flowed down Alicia's eyes. Igni said that Alicia finally needed to stop suppressing her feelings and desires. Alicia loudly replied that Igni was wrong. She was not suppressing anything inside her. Igni closed his eyes and with a smile said that capricious girls look way too cute. Alicia sat in his arms. She looked at Igni and stopped crying. Celia interrupted the boys' conversation and said that Alicia was right. Igni had to surrender, and that would be his best decision because he was in unbearable pain. His legs were burning, and dark smoke was coming from the wounds. Holding Alicia in his arms, Igni loudly neighed a real pain in Alicia's heart. Her torment was hundreds of times stronger than his pain. Igni decided to attack Celia again. He pronounced a spell, and a fireball appeared in the air. Celia wanted to say something but noticed something and got scared. Igni held Alicia in his arms, raised his head, and shouted that he had summoned 16,084 fireballs now. Let Celia try to dodge them all. Celia raised her gaze. Her hair fluttered in the wind, and said that she saw an incredible amount of mana, such that no ordinary sorcerer could handle. Igni looked at Celia from above and thanked her for the compliment. Many fireballs created by Igni hit the ground. A powerful explosion thundered, and large clouds of dust rose into the air. Igni and Alicia hovered in the air above the dust clouds and stared into them. and when the dust began to settle, a faint silhouette appeared for a moment. This was Celia. She stood on the ground and leaned on her sword. Dust clouds slowly dispersed around. Celia said that this time it hurts. Igni looked at Celia and thought. He was surprised that she could speak after such attacks. Celia looked at Celia and thought. She was surprised that she could speak after such attacks. Celia raised the sword, rested it on her shoulder, and then said that now it was time to rebuild everything anew. In a moment, Celia snatched and struck with the sword on the shoulder. Blood splattered in all directions. Alicia stood next to Igni. She placed her hands on his shoulders. Igni was stunned by Celia's action. Celia throws the sword to the ground. Blood spurts from the shoulder. She falls to the ground and says that Igni should not be surprised by her actions. Then a bright light flashes. Before the flash appears the healed Celia. Smiling, she says that this is her miracle. Igni looked seriously at Celia. He believed that for casting spells, mages spend mana according to 110 or 10-1. Celia's magic is capable of creating everything from nothing. She appears before the boys, adjusts her hair with one hand, and holds a sword in the other hand while smiling. Igni and Alicia stand in front of Celia and do not move. Alicia pressed her hand to her chest, then lowered her head and said, "As soon as Celia dies, the reset will trigger, and she will come back to life. She was immortal." Celia stands before the boys, and behind her a bright shimmer rages. Igni looked ahead and said that the pillar of life, the immortal Celia, is a true miracle. Her magic is truly insane. Alicia looked at Igni anxiously. Igni got lost in memories of training with his grandfather. In his hands was a fireball. The grandfather stood behind and said, "Those who are strong are popular, but those who look 120 are much more popular." Igni grimaced and tried to continue casting spells. Behind him was the grandfather, who said he knew many girls stronger than Igni, but still Igni must not give up. He will definitely succeed if he tries. Igni became more confident. He smiled and thought that he finally understood what the grandfather meant. Igni looked at Celia and said that he honed his skills again and again, each time on the brink of death. Celia replied. His words sounded strange because he could not use anything except fireballs. Celia became alert as soon as she heard Igni's words that Celia was right, so he would show her everything he was capable of. Ignis was standing in agony on his knees on trembling legs. He placed one hand on his belt and confidently said he would show Celia the power of his magic. Celia's face darkened, and she asked with displeasure what kind of power he was going to demonstrate now. Igni stood next to Alicia and said that during this spell he would not be able to use fireballs, so his legs would disappear. Celia understood Igni. Alicia grabbed Igni by the stomach. Igni cast a spell, his legs disappeared, and a whirlwind of air rose around the boys. Igni raised his hand and thought that he could not use this spell because of the proximity to the demon lands. Igni spread his palm wide and cast the spell. A frightening aura flared near his hand. Celia looked at Igni with fear and thought she did not understand his magic. It distorted the light. Celia looked at Igni. Alicia was holding him, and he raised both hands up. Celia realized she was wrong because Igni's magic really distorts the reality that already exists. Igni asked if Celia had heard the legend about the creation of their world. Igni threw one trembling fire projectile. Then he claimed that everything started with a small fire projectile. His magic did not allow him to use anything except the fire projectile, so his magic was the magic of the very beginning. Igni pronounced the spell of world creation. Celia wanted to draw her sword from the sheath, but suddenly, for some reason, her body stopped moving. Drops of sweat appeared on Celia's face, and she asked Igni if he had really managed to stop time. Celia held the sword with both hands and said that this was not their world. Igni's tricks would not work here. Igni replied that this was his world, and time was under his control. Celia smiled and said that Igni still would not defeat her, so his attempts were in vain. Darkness fell and Celia froze in place. Igni began to say that Celia was wrong. He intended to break her will, and supposedly, it was worth starting with 10 years. There was emptiness around the boys. Celia thought that nothing moved around them and there was nothing. No wind, no sound. The only thing left was her consciousness. 10 years, that was what Igni meant. Celia looked frightened. She dropped the sword to the ground and bent over slightly. Alicia was holding Igni in her arms. He asked Celia how she had lived the last 10 years. Celia was in despair. She looked at her own hands and whispered, could she really move again? A depressing atmosphere hung around Celia. Celia clenched her fist and with furious rage rushed at Igni. As she was attacking, a thought flashed. Since she was able to move, now she could handle Igni. Celia froze in the air in front of Igni. Igni stood motionless and said that now Celia would be locked up for 100 years. Celia looked ahead and barely made out Igni's face. In horror, she thought, another 100 years and they would be waiting for her again. Celia fell to the ground next to Igni and Alicia. Alicia was holding Igni in her arms. Igni began to say that now the choice was Celia's. She could decide to surrender or keep standing. He could stop time for 1,000 or 1,000,000 years. Celia sat on the ground, lowering her head. After some time, she broke the silence and said that she was going to surrender. After some time, the guys found themselves in a medical center. Igni was sitting on the bed, and Celia had settled at his feet. Celia said that she had completely healed his legs. Igni looked at Celia ominously and said that now she would forget about Alicia, and he, on his part, would not tell anyone about her defeat. Would Celia agree to such terms? Celia agreed. Alicia stood nearby the guys. Celia stood up and Alicia approached her. Celia said that Alicia had found herself a very handsome guy. Alicia exclaimed that Igni was not her boyfriend. Celia touched her chin with her fingers and pondered. Then she looked at the guys and said that if Igni was not Alicia's boyfriend, then he would be her boyfriend. Igni and Alicia were shocked and their mouths dropped open. Alicia was extremely outraged by Celia's words. Celia winked at Alicia and said she was serious. She had a whole 100 years to think about it. Alicia rushed to Celia, her face glowing, and she began shouting that Celia must not do that because she is the first princess of the Empire of Esmeralda, so she must marry officially. Celia replied that she sees no problem with that. Alicia put her hands on her sister's back and began leading her out of the room. Then she said she was grateful to her sister for healing Ian, but now it was time for her to return home. Ian looked at the girls in surprise and thought this was his moment of glory. Alicia sharply turned to Igni, her face flushed with embarrassment. Then she ran up to Igni and kissed him on the cheek. Then she took off and ran. She said she was grateful to Ian for the help and that it was time for her to run away. Ian blushed. He put his hand to his cheek and shouted across the entire medical center that he did not understand what had just happened. Someone enters the room where the girl is sitting in an expensive armchair and addresses her, calling her a saint. The girl in the cloak, having just crossed the threshold, reports she has found the man the lady was looking for. After he asks where he is, she briefly explains. He is in the kingdom of Antony at the Roman Magic Academy. The lady passes the protagonist's photographs from hand to hand and begins to rejoice. She has finally found him, because they had not seen each other for 3 whole years. She sticks his photo to the wall and one of them, Ian, is standing with classmates, and the lady also says she knew about their connection, created by fate itself. Finally, standing by the wall, she calls his name. She folds her hands in front of her and hopes for a quick meeting, while the hero is having a great time in the company of his classmates and other girls. The next day dawns. Iris meets Ian on the street and happily runs to him, grabbing his hand. She greets him in the morning and asks if he slept well. He, walking beside her, replies that he seems to have slept well, and then the girl says that his fights at the tournament were simply incredible, adding that she never doubted him. The hero awkwardly smiles and recalls. After the tournament he fought with a column, imagining throwing a fireball while fighting Celia. In the end, he decides not to boast about all thiesh suspects they will think badly of him. Suddenly he is distracted by a frowning pupil. She blocks their way and decides to tell her classmates the news that almost made her feel sick. Ian asks what exactly the news is. He thinks if the girl is talking about that explosion, then there is nothing strange about it. At that very moment, he remembers the guys who were forced to move to the temporary dormitory. Iris's expression changes immediately. She gestures sharply and explains that Alicia moved to the dormitory, and her shock is visible in her whole body. Then the hero exhales with relief, understands what it is about, and replies that he has heard nothing about it. Suddenly someone flying above them also became interested in this news and asked what was happening. The girl in the air on a broom smiles and asks if she can no longer live in the dormitory. The boys lift their heads and immediately recognize her. It's Alicia. They begin to rejoice at her appearance. When Alicia lands, Igni says it will be even better now. After all, they will all be able to go to the academy together, and she immediately agrees. Then the girl in the hat smiles sweetly, shows her teeth and admits that the hero is right. After that, she steps aside and starts talking to Iris, while Igni meanwhile ponders the dubious theory he had yesterday. Staring intently at Alicia, he mentally repeats to himself, the theory is this: the girl is actually in love with him. At this time she is gently chatting with classmates and occasionally glancing at Igni. He recalls the moment when he saved her and supports his theory with the words that Alicia joyfully kissed him on the cheek, closed her eyes, and did not notice his surprise. But the hero notes that for someone this might be a perfectly normal thing, so he decides to ask the girl herself about everything. He puts on a confident expression, reaches out his hand, calls her name, and she shifts her gaze to him with surprise. But suddenly something stops, flashes. The hero suddenly catches a thought. Maybe it all just seemed that way to him. It flashes in his mind that the girl simply pitied him as a helpless little bug, and Igni freezes for a moment. He begins to hesitate, stalls for time, and tries to think of what to say, while Alicia looks at him with an empty gaze. Igni recalls how sometimes people misunderstand each other and confess love only to break their own hearts. But then he remembers other cases, when people believe that the object of their feelings feels nothing and hide their feelings for life. After the first mistake comes the next, and so it goes every time. To the hero, it seems like endless Helland is presented as an optical illusion of an infinite step. He runs on it, moving from the side called loves to the side called does not love. Drops of sweat run down his forehead. The hero freezes for a moment and asks himself what to do. Suddenly, he remembers the moment when his grandfather approached him for an important conversation. He asked how, according to Igni, popularity means being able to playfully make girls giggle in conversation, and suddenly looked up from work, asking if that really wasn't the case. The girl frowned and said, "No, not at all, because that's just the beginning." He asked Igni to throw away naivety, because such thoughts, on the contrary, would make girls hate him. Hearing this, he immediately got scared and exclaimed, "In what sense could they hate him?" Grandfather clenched his fist and insisted, a hero must live so that the girl falls even more in love with him. He continued to insist, saying that this is what true popularity looks like. Then grandfather told Dean that there are no limits to popularity and explained, making a girl laugh once does not mean being her boyfriend. According to grandfather, he would then look like a fool, and that would be a disgrace for him, so Ian became quite scared. Igni understands that everything is not so simple and makes a depressed facial expression while Alicia watches. He thinks it was only unseen, even then a kiss on the cheek. The main character's face suddenly changes and he begins to smile contentedly. He understands. After such a trifle, Alicia probably did not fall in love with him, and he thanks his grandfather for that conversation. The tangled Iris starts to worry and asks Igni if he is okay, but Alicia answers for him. He is fine because he always behaves that way. Suddenly Yuri approaches her and asks if she is all right. The girl in the hat smiles gently and asks her not to worry. But then Alicia says that in the morning she received a letter from her sister. The girl apologized and wrote that she wants to meet Igni again. The girl in the hat thinks that her sister has settled well, and then Yuri asks if she wants to tell Igni about it. Alicia frowned and replied in a serious tone that she would never do that. A little later, the boys returned to the classroom where the other students were. Two girls approached Ian and, smiling, began to admire him. One of them said they saw the heroes fighting yesterday, and the other admitted she was very impressed, didn't know he was so strong. Seeing their impression, Ian justifies it by saying he was simply lucky, while the quiet ones rejoice in their popularity. Meanwhile, Iris, sitting at the desk in front, catches the conversation and has a bad expression on her face. Suddenly, Alina enters the classroom, greets the students with good morning, looks around, and asks if Ian is here. Barely hearing his name, Ian immediately turns to the teacher, and the girls do the same. Noticing the hero, Ileana approaches him and asks him to go with her. Eugenie is a little surprised and cautious, doesn't understand what to expect. Eventually, he follows her and ends up in the conference hall. There he asks what kind of place it is. The teacher smiles and, pointing a finger, explains, "Students come here to ask teachers for advice." Without showing it, Ian is a bit surprised when Ileana suddenly puts her hand on his shoulder and admits that today she will need his advice. Then she hands him a piece of paper and asks him to look. The hero sees the document's title and asks if this is really the assignment. They sit down at the table, and the teacher explains that third-year students usually do this kind of work. However, Ian's presentation showed her he can also take on such tasks. Then the hero becomes more confident and begins to shine joyfully. He asks what his assignment will be. Leonor replies that it is about transporting weapons. She explains, Igni will have to deliver the cargo to the Duchy of Lurtalia and points on the map where it is and exactly where to. Then Eleanor says she will not force Igni to take this job if he does not want to, but immediately adds, the clients are elves. This is quite unusual because elves do not like humans. And then the hero remembers his teacher Myra, because she is also an elf, but incredibly friendly to people. He recalls how Myra teased him. She would sit on his shoulder, and Eleanor says that this girl is rather an exception to the rule. Then she adds, no matter what, she was very surprised when she received the task from the elves. Igni asks if it had never happened before, and the teacher confirms his suspicions. She says this is the first task of the elves that the Roman Academy has ever received. Then the hero begins to suspect something is wrong. Elves do not like humans, but after his victory in the tournament, they send a letter to the Academy. Igni decides that he has many admirers among the elves and begins to glow. Then he places his hand on his chest and proudly declares that he will gladly take on this matter. Hearing this, Alina smiles softly and says she knew the hero would not let her down, and she is infinitely grateful to him. Then she explains that the task will be completed within 2 weeks, starting next week. The hero will be excused from classes during this period, so he can fully focus on the work. Alina says that Igni will need an assistant and promises to provide one. This surprises him and makes him ask who the assistant will be. He wonders if he can choose a companion for himself, especially when the teacher is so confident in him. She feels a bit uncomfortable, but the smile does not disappear. Ileana replies, this is a very important task, so they cannot lose face. If the hero chooses someone unskilled, the matter may drag on for a long time, and this will have an extremely negative impact on the situation. To avoid such situations, the teachers first select assistants. She thinks of something like a support squad and Igni imagines several girls covering him. He agrees. Then he asks if there are people with whom the hero does not find common ground, and he answers that there are, assuring her he is friends with everyone. Then the teacher was pleasantly surprised by this. She hugs him so tightly that Ian's face ends up right by her chest, and he begins to praise her. Eleanor says the hero is a good boy and asks him to try even harder. For the first few seconds, Ian doesn't fully understand what's happening, but then it all sinks in and, burning with shame, he starts to resist. He gives her a promise in his thoughts he will do everything to the fullest. The day of the mission arrives. Next to the brick wall, Iris notices the hero and starts waving at him. Then she calls out his name, and he comes closer. The hero asks what the girl is doing here, and she, proudly pressing her hand to her chest, replies that she was asked to help him with the task. Igni thinks that Iris is an earth mage of rank S, so she skillfully controls the battlefield, and he himself specializes in firepower. Together they really are a great team. The hero smiles with pleasant surprise, only then noticing. The instructor seems to have prepared a cart for them. Iris smiles widely and says she is insanely happy. Her first mission will be with Igni, and she calls him master. Then they fall silent and an awkward pause hangs. The hero recalls a conversation with his grandfather. He called Ian stupid and remarked that he speaks like a weakling. A heated argument began, and the grandfather called the hero a person who talks nonsense, not understanding the beauty of flat breasts. But Ian sharply retorted, everyone knows that big breasts are the best, so what could be so cool about flat ones? Grandfather and protagonist argue heatedly again. Grandfather says that breast size means nothing and calls Ian a fool because he only sees breasts in them. Then grandfather asks if the hero has thought about the girl's clothes and her character, and after that, if he is not interested in her inner world. Igni suddenly freezes, and grandfather says that he should not think that focusing only on breasts will make him popular. The hero understands grandfather is right. Then grandfather asks, open your eyes. Igni becomes sad and confused, and eventually admits that he was wrong. He understands everything about the girl is important, and believes that no one who loves only breasts deserves to be called a man. This is what Igni realized at that moment, but at the same time thought. Would be nice if Iris had breasts. Noticing his gaze, the girl, puzzled, turns to him and begins to respond in the same way, staring with wide-open eyes. Suddenly, the hero snaps out of his thoughts and suggests moving on. Iris, Igni, and Edward raise their hands and shout that it's time to set off. Suddenly, the hero and the girl freeze, trying to understand what is happening, while the boy smiles widely and suspects nothing. In a moment, Igni grabs Iris, both shudder, and they start off together scared. Edward is shocked by this reaction and says that he was actually with them all along. Then Edward explains that he will carefully monitor the health of Iris and Igni, and the hero has a question. Then the boy places his hand on his chest and explains that he is a healer. As soon as Ian hears this, he is quite surprised. Edward says that although his abilities are rated as a rank, he can still heal a broken arm. Then he adds that this does not mean the boys can just throw themselves into danger, and the girl calls all this complete nonsense. Iris is confident Igni will never succumb to an enemy's blow, so she calls him her master. Edward agrees with her because the hero is his friend and winks at the girl. Igni understands everything is getting serious. He sees boys, despite trying to stay unnoticed, are already ready to kill each other. The hero is a little scared and asks them to stop the quarrel, hinting that it's time to set off on the mission. The boys approach the horse-drawn carriage, and Eleanor sees them arriving. She explains they will go in this carriage to the meeting place. After this, the teacher adds that the details of the mission will be told to them by those who ordered it, and they will also announce the reward. She asks them to get into the transport, warning, the academy will not monitor the mission. Ian mentally summarizes, it turns out they are on their own. All the students get into the carriage, and just as the hero enters last, Eleanor suddenly remembers something. She asks them to remember, if there is an emergency, they can abandon the task. Then Igni turns with a surprised face and asks if it is really possible. The teacher smiles gently and says that, despite how this may affect the situation, the safety of the students is the most important thing for the academy. Therefore, Eleonora asks them not to take unnecessary risks and tries to negotiate with Ian. Before finally stepping into the carriage, he looks back at her one last time and asks her not to worry. Sitting down, the hero clenches his hand into a fist and, looking Eleanor in the eyes, reminds her that he is very strong, while Edward sits down and looks out the window. The teacher looks a little embarrassed for a moment, then smiles again and tells Igni that he is a good boy. The carriage sets off, and she wishes the children a safe journey. Iris grabs the hero and says they are like on a date, and he awkwardly laughs. Meanwhile, Edward turns to them with an indignant expression and asks not to forget about him. Suddenly, Iris remembers something and asks the guys how long they need to get to the destination. The hero replies that he only heard they were being taken to some forest and concludes that since a carriage was called for them, the journey ahead will be long. Sharp clatter of hooves and the sounds of the surrounding nature are heard. Igni closes his eyes and invites the girl and the boy to relax and enjoy the journey. When the carriage arrives at the destination, the boys get off and discuss the road. The hero says they wasted the whole day traveling alone and everyone agrees with him. Suddenly, someone approaches them from behind and announces, "Boys, you have finally arrived." They turn around and an elven girl with a short haircut appears before them. She introduces herself, Lura, the head of the column. Ian thinks this is his first meeting with an elf, not counting Professor Murrow, and considers Laura a beauty. Then he shakes her hand, smiles politely, and says he is extremely glad to meet her, and the elf is amazed, is it really him? Suddenly she starts telling how she saw Igni perform at the tournament, and admits she can't believe he could win using only fireballs. Laura says she has never seen such skill in magic, and the hero, confused, asks if it's true. Then he expresses boundless gratitude and almost jumps for joy in his soul. The elf says that their journey may not last long, but still asks for love and service, and Igni wonders, was it because of her request that he was assigned to carry out the task? Suddenly Laura turns around and asks permission to introduce her companion and the hero casts a surprised look in the same direction. First she points to the girl with a black hood on her face and introduces her as Aina, then points to the dissatisfied elf and calls her Lily. Igni asks, a little surprised, if her companions are standing too far away. Then he approaches them and says he is glad to meet them. He thinks about how to make a good impression so that the girls do not hate him. Suddenly Lily frowned sharply, turned away, and snapped angrily with words. Seeing this, Igni immediately flinched and was afraid that the girl already hated him. The main character explains. After that, they took on the next task and headed to the Duchy of Lortaglia. The crew was led by 2 horses. Along the way, the boys were attacked multiple times by monsters. Among them were goblins and mountain bandits, but according to Igni, they had no chance, and here he recalls. He just spoke with Iris from the carriage, which was standing next to Lily. He explains, despite everything, they still couldn't come to an understanding. Seeing Lily glance at the hero, Iris decides that it seems elves really do not like humans. Later, Laura approaches Lily and asks how much longer she will resist. She says nothing and says that nothing can be changed anymore, but the dissatisfied elf tries to argue with her. Suddenly, Laura cuts her off and apologizes to the boys. She said that Aina is quite reserved by nature, so she doesn't really like to talk, and regarding Lily, she understands that they see everything themselves. The dissatisfied elf turns away and replies that she cannot trust the hero because he only uses fireballs, but he is a bit surprised and says that he does this not because he can't do anything else. Then Igni deliberately smiles and adds that in fact he is a mage of only 1 spell. Lily looked completely indifferent and asked what use he is at all if he is just a one-trick mage, and suddenly the hero was paralyzed by this. Suddenly, when he doesn't know what to say, Laura becomes interested in this spell. A second later, she suddenly rushes to him and starts shaking his shoulders, insisting that this is incredible. Lyric adds, people like him really exist. At first, the hero doesn't understand what the girl is talking about, but later realizes and supports her with words. He thinks that besides his grandfather, he doesn't know any such mages, and out of curiosity asks, are they really so famous among the elves? But contrary to expectations, Laura replies that these mages are not known at all. She says, of course, these are just rumors, but they say that the first pillar of magic is a mage of 1 spell. Hearing this, Iris looks away and thinks about something. She wonders what first pillar means and assumes it refers to the hero. However, Iris says that it's strange. She imagines a mage who fights with magic and sword. She recalls legends supposedly he could cast spells of all elements. Laura responds with displeasure. She knows this because it is in all the stories. That is why she emphasized that these were only rumors, and the hero, standing with his back to her, pays the most attention to them. Suddenly Iris smiles and says that, despite everything, there are many rumors about Mr. Ian and this surprises him. Laura does not quite believe it and asks what exactly. Iris explains that the rumors are different. She cites a myth. Supposedly Igni is the son of an aristocrat and she is his servant. Then the girl tells another rumor supposedly the hero has his own Jaisharan. As they say, he meets with both her and Alicia. This makes him wary. Iris adds that there is also a rumor about his relationships with Myra and Elinor, or with Ermi and Elinor, and then says that he is portrayed as someone romantically involved with literally everyone. Igni does not believe what he hears and voices it aloud, and Lily says that it is disgusting. Then the hero decides to ask Iris something else, but she immediately understands what he is thinking and says that, of course, it also concerns Yuri. Igni imagines her and thinks that this is exactly what he expected. Then Iris recalls Edward and says that he starts shouting every time he hears such rumors. She glances at the boy and winks, and the hero turns in the same direction with an expression of genuine surprise. Edward notices this and frowns, sweat already trembling on his forehead. He begins to justify himself, saying that he simply cannot stand it when people talk nonsense. Edward asks Igni not to think that he did it for his sake and turns away. Hearing this, Iris rolls her eyes and says that it would have been better if the boy had answered honestly. Suddenly, as soon as she opens her eyes, something appears before her and she screams. The girl says she sees the city ahead and concludes they have already passed half the way. Laura stops and turns to the boys. She suggests setting up camp here, and Iris suddenly becomes confused. The elf pretends to want to ask why they cannot spend the night at the inn, and the girl confirms her suspicion. Then Laura stretches out her hand forward, points with her index finger, and explains that although staying in a hotel is safer and more convenient, it does not mean that the boys will be completely safe. Edward guesses her thoughts and says that the reason is the transportation of weapons. The elf smiles and replies, that is exactly why they have to set up camp. Then she explains that their cart could be stolen if left unattended, and convinces them that it is safer to spend the night just outside watching over the cargo. The hero imagines an angry, and at the same time delighted thief pulling a sack from the cart, and Iris says that it makes sense. Then Laura suggests the children pair up, but before she can explain why, Lily suddenly interrupts, raising her hand. She frowns and says she wants to be on guard with them, touching her own chest with her hand. Lily stands next to the hero. She smiles but tensely and turns her head away from him. Laura notices this and announces that she has already made her decision. After that, they light a fire. Lily and Igni sit together, not far from the fire, and turn away from each other. The embarrassed elf does not understand why she was seated next to him, while he thinks about how tense the atmosphere has become. Yet he is still grateful to Laura for this. The hero recalls how she waved to them and said that they would definitely become friends. Suddenly, Igni remembers a conversation with his grandfather. Once he created fire between his palms, turned to his grandfather, and said he wanted to become popular as soon as possible. While the grandfather just stood and watched his fun, Igni asked how to attract the attention of girls. Despite the protagonist's good mood, the grandfather interrupts sharply. He will never be able to please the girls. Igni's face instantly changes and he asks him to repeat. The grandfather explains. If the protagonist were as popular as he is, then something could be done, but now nothing will help. While the protagonist is shocked and silent, the grandfather adds, simply no one knows him yet. The grandfather asks Igni to think for himself and asks if someone can fall in love with a random passerby. In his mind, it looks like a picture. A lonely boy stands by a wall, and many unfamiliar women pass by him. The hero replies that people can love passersby too, but the grandfather insists. These are just fairy tales asking him to open his eyes. Not wanting to argue with his grandfather, Igni decides that he just needs to attract attention and asks about it. But he suddenly stretches out his hand and wildly throws back that popularity is gained only by attracting attention with charisma, convincing the hero. This is the foundation of everything. When Igni sits next to Lily, he remembers that he must impress her with his charisma. He decides to do it right now and with full confidence turns to Lily, but suddenly something attacks them. The hero has to push her away, ordering, "Be careful." The elf trembles with fear and hides behind Igni, angrily asking what he is doing. At that moment, a huge angry horned owl rises above them, forcing Lily to stop her indignation and attracting everyone's attention. The girl recognizes the animal and reports that it is a kidnapper owl. She begins to retreat and says that such owls attack children and drag them back to their nests. Hearing this, Igni immediately becomes alert. Suddenly, Lily sees the owl start looking at her and instantly understands. She starts to run away and hides behind the hero, not understanding why the owl is attacking her. Ian says that the animal probably mistook her for a child, but Lily replies that she is no longer a child. Then the hero extends his hand with his index finger and casts the spell Homing Flame, while the owl is already preparing to attack them again. The blow throws the animal into the air, and the girl looks at its power in amazement. After that, she gets up and sincerely thanks him from the bottom of her heart. Suddenly, Lily notices that a button flew off Ian's shirt, and he confidently assumes it happened while he was dodging. The girl starts to search with her eyes along his collar, and the hero realizes everything already looks strange. He calls her. Willie says he will sew the button back on. He asks Ian to stay still and notices that he has some kind of necklace decoration. A second later, he understands what she means and pulls the chain out from under the shirt. Ian explains that it is just a ring that speeds up spells. He got it for winning a tournament. Lily freezes for a moment to get a better look at the ring, then suddenly shudders because something flashed through her mind. The girl asks the hero not to think that she is sitting next to him so that he would protect her, and explains she just needs to look closer at this ring. Then she pulls away from Ian, her face flushes with a blush. He smiles in response and thinks that now he understands everything. He realizes she is a tsundere, a person who behaves aggressively towards the object of their love. He recalls a conversation with his grandfather when he said he could not stand tsunderes. He decided to ask why he has such anger towards him. The hero replies that they can never be understood. In his opinion, these girls seem to love a man, yet at the same time behave arrogantly towards him. Hearing this, the old man said that Igni demands too much. He wanted both undeserved popularity and the girl's recognition at once. Then he asked the hero not to underestimate his popularity. The old man suggested he introduce himself. The hero imagines how at first the girl treats him with biased contempt and endlessly quarrels with him, but then, at some point, she opens up and the hero finally feels her kindness. At that very moment, Igni recalls, this is the beauty of being tsundere. The next day dawns. Lily stands on a forest path and suddenly senses someone's approach. She sharply turns around and seeing the hero, immediately frowns. The girl asks what he wants and insists that he not look at her. At that moment, Laura approaches them and asks to stop the quarrel, but the hero replies that he is already used to it. Igni puts on a satisfied mask and folds his arms across his chest. He somewhat regrets that Lily has returned to her usual nature, but this is part of being tsundere. Then he wonders, was Alicia's kiss also a manifestation of that tender, friendly side of tsundere? Now he understands. Tsundere girls are the best. Seeing Igni shining with happiness, Iris turns to him and notes that he is in a very good mood. Then the hero turns to the girl and asks what she thinks about boys who at first behave coldly towards girls, but later become kind. This question makes Iris pause as they walk further behind the carriage. After some time, the girl awkwardly smiles and admits that such boys scare her. Igni is surprised but smiles a little and understands. Iris thinks the same way he once did. In his thoughts, he addresses the girl and tells her that she still has a whole life ahead. The girl awkwardly smiles and confirms she still has a whole life ahead. Suddenly, Iris thinks and says that Edward is that very boy. At first he was cold, but then began to treat you kindly. The protagonist freezes in shock when the boy pronounces his name and asks if the nickname was from a girl. Iris notices that Igni has turned pale to the edge and freezes in surprise. She starts calling him, but he doesn't even respond to his own name. Suddenly, Laura distracts them and asks everyone to look ahead. She points to the fortress and says that these are the walls of the city of Richilia. After that, she explains, if they cross them, their mission will be accomplished. But suddenly, Laura notices someone's eyes in the darkness and reports that someone is in the forest. The hero sees the same and turns to Iris, asking her to create a barrier. She agrees, clenches her fist, and prepares to cast a spell. Iris raises her hand and utters the stone wall spell. A thick stone wall grows around her. Hearing loud stomping, Laura first thinks it's bandits, but Igni clearly understands what is happening and denies it. They see a whole horde of huge stone people approaching them, and the hero reports, the bees are golems. The golems approach the wall and begin to crumble into stones. Iris sees, there are countless of them here, but despite this, she still decides to fight them. She raises her hand again and uses the burial spell, after which the golems begin to contract and crumble against the stone walls. Seeing that not all are destroyed, the girl turns and apologizes for part of them slipping out of her control, and the hero replies that everything is going as it should. He casts a fire spell and directs it at the golems. Meanwhile, Lily covers his back, repelling an attack with a wind blade. From such powerful blows, the golems crumbled. They didn't even manage to approach the boys. When all the golems fell, Ian and Lily decided to stay on defense and observe the situation. Since no one seems to be attacking them, the hero decides, this is the end. Lily, also looking at the remains of the golems, says that there weren't that many of them. Suddenly, Laura approaches them, smiles at Riley, and says that the hero and the girl did well. After that, she asks when they became so close. Lily immediately blushes and starts to turn pale from embarrassment, asking what exactly she means by close. Suddenly, a voice speaks to Laurent. She freezes in horror. From the cart harnessed with horses, a voice sounded. He asked why they had not destroyed them yet. The hero is wildly surprised by the human voice from the carriage, did not know anyone was there. Iris also begins to worry and glances at Igni. Suddenly, the only surviving stone golem stands behind her and prepares to attack. The hero notices this first and starts shouting at Iris to run, only has time to turn around. But the blow does not reach her face, it stops just a few centimeters from the eye. From the cart, a voice calls out, ordering her to look. He says if golems are not completely destroyed, this can happen when the monster crumbles into sand. Igni notices that the man destroyed the golem only with the power of his mind and is very surprised. Laura places her hand on her chest and apologizes for this incident, although the hero sees no one has moved from their place. Suddenly, a woman's voice came from the carriage, and it became clear. Igni was not afraid at all. From the intonation, it was clear that the one speaking from there was a little surprised. Then the girl asks Igni to come to her and show her face, but Lura replies that it is impossible and says they have almost reached Richilia. But no one listens to her, and someone's voice calls the girl to open the door. Her face goes pale, and sweat pours abundantly from her forehead. At this time, Edward stands next to the boys, eyes wide open, and the cautious hero is already beginning to suspect something bad. While Laura, with a serious face, fulfilled the voice's request and opened the door. Igni began to wonder, could this really be the weapon? A beautiful girl appeared from the carriage, a ribbon tied over her eyes. Her ears showed that she was an elf, but despite this, she smiled at the people. The events moved to the conference room. Alicia enters, and Alina asks what happened, because students almost never come to school on weekends. The girl sits at the table and says that her sister sent a letter asking her to return home. Alina puts her hand to her face and asks if she is really sure about her decision. Then she adds that Alicia recently had an unpleasant incident with Celia, the one who asked her to reconsider. But she closes her eyes and calmly replies that everything is fine. She says she has already resolved the conflict with her sister and is about to add something else. Seeing that the girl began to hesitate, Alina smiled sweetly and asked what exactly she wanted to say. Alicia says she needs to do something important, then quickly gets ready and leaves. Alina remains alone in the office, sitting and thinking about how strange this task looks. She recalls that nothing special was planned for the duchy and raises her gaze. Looking at the ceiling and thinking about something, the teacher says she has a bad feeling. Meanwhile, in the forest, the main character learns about an important shipment that was escorted to the city and meets a strange girl. Looking at the calm elf whose eyes are covered with a ribbon, Igni wonders, is she really the weapon? She sits too close to him, which makes him wary. Feeling his tension, the girl apologizes and explains. Since her eyes are blind, she needs to stay closer so that he feels safer. Then she turns to him, a friendly smile appears on her face. The girl says that now she sees Igni. He keeps glancing at her and suddenly realizes that name suits her. The hero thinks that the girl truly deserves to be called a weapon when he looks at her large breasts, slightly covered by clothing. He notes that her body is relatively small, yet still impressive in proportions. Igni calls the girl short with large breasts while she sits quietly and suspects nothing. He recalls another conversation with his grandfather. The hero told him that he likes short girls with big breasts. Realizing this, the grandfather was horrified, and drops of sweat ran down his forehead. At that moment, he shouted and asked the hero to repeat what he said. He waves his hand and immediately begins to object. The grandfather says the hero should be fighting evil, not siding with it. He blocks the blow and strikes back. Igni says this is not evil, while the grandfather is in shock. Then the old man, taking a few steps back, asks if the hero has really lost his mind. After all the training, and here Igni concludes that he has completely forgotten something. He says that lolly girls and big breasts at first glance are complete opposites, but the hero adds, when these two things come together, they create something beautiful. Judging by Ian's expression, his grandfather definitely misunderstood these words. The hero says it's just tsundere, in the spirit of their kind, meaning together, they fully reveal each other. He frowns and clenches his fists tightly, so stubbornly wanting to prove this to his grandfather. For a moment, the grandfather stands rooted, his hand outstretched, mouth agape, sweat rolling down his forehead, and his whole body trembling. But then he recovers from the shock and exhales with some hesitation, while the hero watches this with slightly frightened eyes. The grandfather closes his eyes, turns his head away, and admits he cannot believe that the time has come when Ian is teaching him something. Then their argument ended against the backdrop of the sunset, an empty road, rocky hills around, and the hero suddenly realized he had forgotten what it means to be young. He looks again at the girl and cannot believe that a big-breasted lolly is sitting before him. She turns to him and asks his name. The hero says his name. The girl recognizes him from this information. Then the girl confesses that it was she who called him, and Igni is quite surprised. He asks her again, thinking it was Laura. Then the elf decides to introduce herself and says that her name is Clara. The hero realizes before him is an elf named Clara, and he freezes in thought. Suddenly, Ignis realizes. In front of him sits the blade pilaster of the sword, while the girl says she is glad to meet him. The hero says that Clara is a sorceress, but she is not capable of performing magic. He suggests that probably there is no person in the world who has not heard of her. Ian squeezes Clary's hand and decides to ask why she is needed by him, addressing her formally and using you in the formal form. Then the girl gently smiles and confesses that she likes the hero, and he suddenly screams from shock. Then Clara asks if it is true that Igni cannot use any spells except fireballs, and he answers that it is. The girl raises one hand to the other and says that she and he are alike, confirming that she feels it herself. And they begin to smile, and the hero understands. The first step to find something in common with the girl you like has been successful. Igni already thinks his time has come, but suddenly Clara exclaims that it is her time, and Lura records it. Although the girl, closing her eyes, announced it quite calmly, another elf took everything very seriously. Igni comes out and the carriage doors slam shut. Clara manages to say they will see each other again, but already loses hearing. Suddenly, the boy standing behind the hero nervously calls his name. This makes Igni tense up and turn sharply. His eyes understand nothing. Iris and Edward rushed to him and asked if he was wounded and if everything was all right. Ian steps back from them and says that he is fine. Then he explains that Clara is an absolutely ordinary girl, but Iris exclaims that she does not believe it. She felt a strong thirst for blood then. Edward nervously looks away and says he had no idea. Elven weaponry is one of the pillars. But Iris exhales heavily and admits that there is nothing strange about it, after which the boy begins to look at her. The girl explains with regret that both the kingdom and the empire often use people as weapons. Edward folds his arms across his chest, and the hero asks in surprise if that is true. When he realizes that if he thinks about it, it also concerns Alicia. He recalls how she stood in a hat in a puddle of blood next to the lifeless body of a man. Suddenly Laura approaches the boys and calls them because of this. Iris and Edward turn around. She folds her hands together and closes one eye. The girl begins to smile awkwardly and says she hopes they will be able to keep what happened a secret. The boys smile and the hero's face even begins to blush. Edward says that they of course will keep everything, and Iris suggests, if they blab, all the countries will hunt Clara. Then she adds that this girl has insane bloodthirstiness, simply incredible, and Igni confirms. The countries really have a reason to chase Clara, recalling her large, barely covered breasts. Realizing this, Laura exhales with relief and thanks the boys for understanding. But suddenly Iris decides to ask why then they were moving so slowly. Then the elf explains. If someone found out about their cargo, completing the task would become much harder. Then she adds, on top of all this, Clara also cannot use magic, and Igni, looking at her with wide-open eyes, concludes that this is probably the main reason. Laura tells the boys to continue on at any cost and warns, as soon as they reach the duchy, their task will be completed. The boys and the girl agree and follow the carriage. Over time, they reach brick walls, and the carriage enters inside through the open gates. The boys arrive in the city and step out onto a noisy square, where the crowd presses from all sides. There Loretta tells them that they will have to split up. The girl explains that she and Eno will take the weapons to their friends, and then adds that they will most likely spend the night there. After that, Laura asks Lily to rent a room for the boys, and for Herselfan she agrees. Having received a positive response, the girls and the cart set off, saying they will see the boys tomorrow. After that, they find a building with a sign in and go inside. When they approach the reception, Lily rents several rooms and asks the hero to leave the things in the room, and then go to dinner. Suddenly, the joyful Iris jumps on him and declares that she wants to live in the same room as Igni. Lily snorts and asks to repeat the question. She stands between the girl and the hero, pushes them apart with her hands, and says that it is not allowed. Boys and girls must sleep separately. She immediately grabs Iris by the hand and, burning with shame, insists that she go with her. When the girls enter the room, Iris falls onto the bed and complains that she is very tired. Lily, trying to be as strict as possible, says that they can rest a little and then go eat. Suddenly, Iris lights up with interest and asks why she is so rude, and the girl replies that she is not rude at all and does not understand why Iris thinks so at all. Then the girl lying on the bed explains, she just thought that Lily looks very good with such a smile. Realizing this, she freezes in front of the mirror and reflects on what was just said about the smile. Iris notices that she froze, so she gets up from the bed and asks what happened. Lily trembles nervously and says everything is fine, but declares that she is already tired of this idling and chatter. She asks if Iris knows how many people are in the taverns at this time. Then the girl leaves the room and, closing her eyes, asks the other to catch up with dissatisfaction. But suddenly she opens her eyes and sees, standing in the doorway opposite the surprised hero. Igni is a little surprised by this meeting and asks if he scared the girl, extending his hand to her. Lilia immediately takes a closed posture, and a blush flashes on her face. The girl turns her head away and says that she was not scared at all. At that moment she feels something strange. Ian tells her to wait for his friends near the hotel, and she reluctantly agrees. The hero glances at Lily. She shyly tries to stare at the floor, and her heart is beating too hard. They go outside and wait for the friends, standing close together. Igni folds his arms on his chest, and Lily squeezes one palm in the other. Suddenly, the hero turns to her. She twitches and asks what happened. Igni asks if the girl knew about the weapon, and she answers that she did and approaches him closer. Lilia admits that she knew about it and explains. Clara loves to sleep, so she concludes that Clara slept through most of the journey. The hero takes this into account and thinks that he will wait for them tomorrow. When he raises this topic, Lily becomes a little wary. The main hero closes his eyes and says that tomorrow they will meet with the Duke, and only then will their mission be accomplished. At first, Lily listens carefully to Ian, but then her gaze changes and she suddenly understands something. The girl says that the hero is right, after which he admits it sounds a little sad to him. Lily asks if he really thinks so, and she herself feels uncomfortable, and the hero tells her. Of course, he told her the truth. At that moment, Iris and Edward approach them, joyfully greeting Igni. He also starts waving his hand, while Lily turns away, trying to understand what she is feeling right now. The next day, Dawn unfolds the events and the story moves to the duchy. The boys enter the Great Hall, and then Lilia steps forward and stands before the man sitting on the throne. Then the cautious hero stands behind the girl and mentally tells her that they have met with the Duke. After this meeting, the guys quickly return to the big city to the Mura Fortress, built on a large development and raised by tall buildings. Walking along the road, the hero notices Lura and Clara walking nearby. The first tries to support the second, and the second asks her to slow down. Seeing this, Igni thinks that Clara does not quite look like a support right now. Suddenly, she turns to the hero and asks if he is free. He blinks in slight surprise, then says that he seems to have nothing to do. Meanwhile, Lily quietly follows them, staying behind and watching the situation closely. Then Clara politely asks Igni if he could take a walk with her around the city and suddenly frowns. He begins to think that she is hinting at a date. And just as Igni is almost ready to agree to the proposal without any problems, Lily suddenly unexpected even to herself shouts that it is impossible. The shocked hero and Clara turn around, and she asks why she decided so. Lily turns away awkwardly and says that she considers it extremely dangerous, hesitating a little at first. Clara does not understand the danger and reminds him that she is a support. Then she folds her arms and adds that besides, Igni will be with her, and Lily begins to worry even more and tries to somehow refute the girl's arguments. Suddenly Lura appears behind her and, smiling kindly, says that Clara is right, so Lily does not need to worry, everything will be fine. Then she doubts and begins to whine. The hero thinks about Lura and tells her that he will return by evening. After that, Clara sharply and displeasedly hints to him to go. Then she tells the hero that during their walk he does not need to behave as he should after all. On dates, people should communicate freely with each other. Realizing that it is still a date, Igni shines with joy and asks where they are heading, but the girl replies that she prefers to trust him. The hero thinks about the fact that Clara's eyes are blindfolded, so she cannot understand if something attracts her. He tries to remember what girls like and literally trembles with excitement. This is his first date. Suddenly a thought flies into his head and Igni jerks, staring so wide-eyed as if he was pricked with a needle. Flashed by the idea, he calls Clara and they find themselves in a cafe. The hero and the girl sit at a table with an umbrella and order food. Ian tells Clara that there is already a plate with fruits and honey in front of her and asks, "Help yourself." The girl tries the dish and says that it is very sweet. Then she smiles and adds that she likes it, and the hero replies that he is very happy. But suddenly Clara accidentally spills a spoon with food and honey spills on the table. The hero notices this and points with his finger. Then he tells the girl that Clara spilled the honey, and she thanks him for the attention. But suddenly she grabs his hand and sticks out her tongue, bringing Ian's hand to her mouth. She manages to lick his finger. The hero jerks his hand back and says that maybe his hands are dirty. He is terribly embarrassed, and Clara apologizes. She admits she did not want the hero to dirty his clothes. The girl, looking at the plate almost completely licked clean, says that the dish was very tasty, and Igni replies, "That's good." Then the hero gets up from the chair and asks what they will do next, while the girl ponders. Suddenly a girl starts approaching their table. It seems she accidentally met Ian. Getting closer, she finally realizes that she really met the hero and begins running towards him. The girl throws herself into his arms, although Igni does not understand what exactly is happening. He somehow tries to push her away, but suddenly she lifts her head and with the corner of her eye glides over his face, saying that it really is him. Tears are already welling up in the girl's eyes, and she says that she misses the hero very much, calling him by name. Meanwhile, Alicia is busy with her own affairs. She explains, her family asked her to return home, but this request was presented as a mission. Since the girl is going on a mission, Yuri was sent along with her to help. From his appearance, it is clear he feels unbearably bad. He turns to Alicia, and she immediately shifts her gaze to him and asks what happened. Yuri tightens his collar and asks if he really has to wear such clothes. The girl replies that he absolutely must. The boy points out that it is women's clothing, and Alicia says, that's the whole point. Then she explains that people usually perceive two women traveling together very well. Therefore, she says, the boy must look exactly like that. Seeing her frowning face, Yuri blushes and is surprised, then asks if it is really true. But then he says that they would treat him the same way, even if he wore men's clothing. Then Alicia understands this and, scratching the back of her head, admits that she hadn't thought about it at all. She says that the man might change in the next town, and the boy immediately starts to rejoice. But then he asks the girl what is happening and asks her to tell him about it. Yuri, looking at Alicia's expression, assumes something very serious has happened. She takes out a document and explains that she received a letter asking for help, but the boy tries to read it and says he doesn't understand anything. Alicia explains this is normal because everything is written in code, and then tries to tell what exactly is written in the letter. The girl says that the letter orders her to intervene with the saint, and Yuri suddenly becomes alert. Fear and surprise flash in his eyes as he asks if Alicia really has to intervene with the saint, but she frowns and says that she is not happy about it either. The girl then mentally explains. The saintess is a girl who has a unique ability to cleanse lands polluted by impurity from the demonic world. Malicious Alicia admits that she would gladly have stayed at the academy, and frightened Yuri cautiously clarifies why they are now traveling by carriage. The girl explains that the matter is not only about the saint, but also about the hero. After that, Alicia showed a note with information about the fiancé in Tarquis. It said that he was expelled from the family and now has no surname, but at the same time, they knew that saint. Rose had just set out to meet her fiancé. By this time, Rose had already managed to meet the hero quite unexpectedly for him. She grabbed his hands, pressed closer, and said that she missed him terribly, calling him by name. Ian frowned and tried to break free from the unfamiliar girl, but suddenly he realized her voice was very familiar. The hero freezes for a second and thinks could it really be Rose in front of him. Hearing this, the saint smiled broadly, and tears gather in her eyes. Ian continues to look at her intently, recalling how she looked before and comparing her then to now, and then he remembers. Her name is Rose Ackerman, and she is his former fiancée. She clenches her fists with joy and exclaims that she always knew. They are connected by the red thread of fate. The hero does not understand and asks which thread she is talking about. Rose folds her hands, closes her eyes, and recounts how long she has been searching for Igmi and how happy she is to have finally found him. She is certain all this is thanks to the power of their love. The heroine recalls that it seemed she had always been so active. Suddenly a memory comes to him, how he sat quietly under a tree and bothered no one. Suddenly a joyful Rose appeared behind the tree and called out to Ian, frightening him. Her appearance confused him and he immediately voiced it aloud. Rose decided to approach and ask if he had run away from the mansion again. The hero responded with displeasure, as if saying such a thing, and in response asked what she was doing here. Then the girl sat next to him and said that she wanted to meet with him, and Igni was clearly very shocked. A little embarrassed, he looked away and decided to ask if Rose needed anything from him. But in response, she smiled broadly and said that she needed nothing because he was her dear fiancé, and then she asked, "Isn't that so?" The hero began to blush and moved away from her. Suddenly, the girl opened her eyes and realized it was time to go. Igni's face had changed. Then the girl began to leave, but paused for a moment to say goodbye to the hero. Igni also waved back and did not notice how the old man suddenly approached him from behind. He called what happened a disgrace, and the hero suddenly got scared upon hearing the sudden voice behind him. The old man said that there are many girls in the world who are much better than her, but Igni replied that she does not need to become as popular as he is. Then the hero added with an important mistake that, after all, he does have a fiancée. He admitted that he thought Rose loves him. The old man asked if he was sure because he thought she likes this very shade of love at least for now, but Igni was very surprised and worried. Rose closes her eyes and touches her face with her hand, whispering the main hero's name again and again. He is a little shocked by her behavior and freezes, not understanding. Was she always like this? The girl notes what a wonderful day it is, and then adds that it is also the perfect day for their wedding. As soon as he hears this, Ian suddenly shudders. He apologizes and explains that he was kicked out of the family. The hero cautiously tries to convey that he does not believe they will be able to. But this does not embarrass the girl at all. She puts her hand on her chest, smiles, and says that she knows about it. Then Ian asks why she needs him, and Rose replies that she thinks it is obvious anyway. She explains that she came to the hero because she loves him and looks at him with a pitiful gaze. Igni immediately frowns, tenses up, not understanding what else to expect from her. Suddenly Rose grabs his hand and pulls him closer. She says that this is exactly why she asked him to bring the hero. She looks at him with wide-open eyes while he is overwhelmed by shock. Igni remembers how Clara stood behind him and decides to ask if she knows Rose. The elf replies that he was right and tells the girl she arrived much faster than she thought. Clara begins to feel a little sad and admits that she would like to enjoy their meeting a little longer. Rose asks the elf about the date, a little surprised, and Igni tries to find something to say to justify himself. Suddenly, the girl bursts out and says that they had agreed. Clara and the others would take him to the city, and also that she does not remember allowing them to go on dates with Ian. She was about to add something else when suddenly another thought struck her and her facial expression changed sharply. Rose says she understands everything now and approaches the hero. Confused, Igni asks the girl what she understood, and she, with full confidence, decides that the hero was just training before the date with her. After that, Rose becomes even more convinced of her version and says that Igni should not communicate with other girls, he only needs her. The girl is delighted with what she drew for herself, and the hero decides not to argue. She says she understands since they haven't seen each other for so long, and Rose convinces the hero that he shouldn't resort to such extreme measures. She loves him as he is, but she immediately tells him with empty eyes, novels with other girls are now forbidden for him. Then Rose falls in love again and tells the hero not to worry, will make sure he never has to look for another girl again. Igni is stunned again and asks her again. Suddenly she casts the spell Holy Shackles, and he steps aside, trying to figure out what it even is. Rose, realizing that nothing worked, screams and asks why he dodged, almost crying. Igni notices that something is clearly wrong with her and tries to calm himself. He asks her not to lose control, to keep a cool head, and to stay composed. Then the hero points his finger at the girl. He says he is not the type to chase girls, it is the girls who chase him. Suddenly Rose is overwhelmed by shock. She grabs her chest with her hand and freezes. The only word that escapes her lips is his name. Suddenly the girl changes again and begins enthusiastically talking about how cool Ian is. Seeing this, Clara concludes, love is blind, and the hero admits that such a reaction pleases him very much, even if Rose is a little out of it. Then the elf decides to tell Rose that she has already brought Igni as agreed and announces, now it's their turn. The girl, delighted, agrees and says that with Igni she will be able to move mountains. Suddenly the hero understands the essence of what is happening, and he shouts, demanding that they stop, and asks what exact deal they made. Rose approaches the hero and asks if he knows which element the saints belong to. Confused, Igni thinks they have some kind of holy magic while the girl walks beside him, holding his hand. She says the hero is right. Holy magic is the only element capable of cleansing the filth of demonic lands. He freezes and repeats her words about how to cleanse that filth. Igni thinks years in demon lands, and he really seemed to have forgotten that ordinary people can live here. He frowns and recalls how by the end of his training he could kill monsters even in his sleep. The hero explains, in the lands of demons, magic is endless. Because of this, the monsters living there begin to mutate in strange ways. If not stopped, the whole world will turn into the lands of demons. He says that this is why Rose, being a sanctuary, must cleanse certain places of pollution. Ian begins to look intently at the girl, when suddenly Clara decides to speak. She says that this corruption is rapidly spreading through the elven lands, but then adds, if nothing is done and everything is just left as it will affect foreign territories as well. Judging by her words, that is why Clara and Rose made a deal. The elf will bring you, and in return the saint will cleanse her homeland of all filth. Then the hero realized what was happening and said, the girls could have just said it, as it is from the start. Clara admits she was afraid that Ian would refuse to go, but still wanted to tell him about it when they were alone in the carriage. Then the elf adds that, supposedly, the hero is not the kind to abandon someone in trouble, and asks if that is true. Ian does not know what to answer, so he only hums deeply and uncertainly in a questioning way. But Clara still tries to get an answer from him, insisting that popular guys do that. Rose turns to Ishini with a smile and confirms that he is the coolest person in the whole world. He feels a bit awkward, so he proudly lowers his head and asks them not to exaggerate. Rose becomes a little sad and starts behaving childishly, tugging at the hero's clothes. She casts a pitiful look at him and, almost crying, asks if he will go with her to Clara. Igni recalls one of the key ways to gain popularity is to save a girl when she is in trouble. Right now, 2 such girls are standing before him. The hero freezes for a few seconds, racking his brain over what to say, then agrees to stay with them until they finish. Hearing this, Rose's eyes light up with joyful surprise. Then she throws herself into his arms and confesses that she can't believe they will really be together. Judging by her facial expression, her joy knew no bounds. She smiles broadly and says she is very happy because of this. Suddenly, Rose steps back and takes his hands in hers. With wide-open eyes, she tells the hero, the carriage is ready, so they can depart. The girl suggests going with her immediately, without any delays, but Igni wants to slow down and asks if everything is so urgent. Then Clara says he has nothing to fear and promises to tell her friends about it. She approaches the wagon, smiles gently, and wishes them a good journey, preparing to see them off. When Ian and Rose sit in the carriage and it starts moving, he manages to notice Iris. Standing by the gates, she watches the hero with a look full of incomprehension. Then the girl decides to go to Edward and, shouting, informs him that Ian left the city in some carriage. The boy sitting on the bench is wildly surprised and asks what the hero could have been thinking. Iris dismisses any assumptions. Still, she says, before Ian left, she saw him talking with Clara and another unfamiliar girl. Suddenly, someone else approaches the boys, perhaps, already knowing about the hero's sudden departure. It was Laura. She came up to the boy and girl and reminded them that she had asked them to wait for her here. Iris casts her a look full of contempt and exhaustion, and drops of sweat roll down her forehead one after another. Then she turns to Laura and admits that she feels she is hiding something. The elf freezes for a moment, trying to figure out what to say, and suddenly her face changes. She smiles broadly and asks Iris why she is making such a scary face. Laura explains that Igni just went on another mission, waved her hand indifferently, as if it were nothing special at all. Then she says that in the end the hero himself agreed to it, and adds, as soon as he completes the task, he will be brought. Laura smiled again and added that, therefore, the boys had nothing to worry about and they returned to the academy, pressing their hands to their chests. While the very serious Iris was listening to her, someone else approached them and announced, "Igni will not return." Laura barely smiles and, not noticing who said it, asks him a question, "What is this sudden change?" But it turned out to be Lily. She had a very serious, frowning face. It was clear the girl was clearly angry. She pressed her hand to her chest and addressed Iris, then approached the boys. Then Lily turned to Laura, crossed her arms over her chest, and said she was tired of lying. Laura begins to justify herself. She says that no one here is lying, but the elf shouts Agin asks to stop and stop lying, and the rest of the boys do not understand anything and just watch the situation. Lily says that Igni was really taken and explains, it was done by Swordpillar and Lady Saint. Hearing this, the boys freeze in shock. Edward frowns gloomily, not believing what is happening, while Iris, on the contrary, raises her eyebrows and asks again about the saint. Then Lilia, with a very serious face, explains, until the curse of the demonic lands is completely lifted from their world, Igni will not be able to return home. Lyra puts her hand to her forehead and hides her face. She admits that she does not understand what came over the girl and asks if she really decided to betray the elves. Lily, of course, replies that she never intended to betray anyone and turns away. Then she clenches her hand into a fist and is about to start objecting. The girl places her hand on her chest, frowns, and says that she is not going to deceive Igni because he had to make his own choice. Laura notices this surprise and admits, of course, she wanted Lily to befriend the hero. Then she looks away and says that she just didn't think Igni would become too dear to her. Suddenly, she stretches out her hand forward and casts some spell. 3 magical threads burst from her palm. The web begins to surround the boys as soon as they try to understand what is happening and jump away from it, but the threads bind their movements and pull them together, tying all 3. Despite the hopelessness of the whole situation, the boys still try to break free, and Laura insists, everything will be fine if they do not resist. But as soon as she manages to finish speaking, a gust of wind suddenly distracts her. It suddenly blows from nowhere. Whoever summoned the wind releases an air blast, a spell that throws Laura aside. She manages to raise her gaze and sees Alicia and Yuri flying through the air on a broomstick. After leaving, they head into the forest to find shelter and figure out what is going on. There, Alicia is told, the real goal of the mission is to deliver Igni to the saint so she can take him with her. The girl repeats this again, and Ira says she understood correctly. Suddenly, Edward cuts off the conversation and asks why the hero even needs that saint. He is explained, Igni and the saint have been friends since childhood, and Rose, moreover, is simply obsessed with him. Iris lowers her head and realizes they were simply used, and Lily remains silent. Then she lowers her gaze and says she understands. They are all good people. Lily explains that the poison of the demonic world began to spread across the elven lands. That's why they couldn't hold back. Following this, Edward and Iris raise their heads and look at her. Lily apologizes to everyone and asks Yuri if everything will be fine with Laura. The man carefully raises his hands up and says that, of course, everything will be fine with the girl. Yuri explains that he only blinded her with his magic and reassures the boys. He did not use any violence. For now, Laura is sitting behind him. Her body is trembling, and dark magic envelops her like a shroud. She keeps repeating that she feels dark, cramped, and scared. Edward sees all this and recalls, people should not be judged by their appearance. Then he asks what they should do, and Alicia replies that, of course, they will bring him back by force. She explains her plan, to catch the carriage on a broom, and asks Yuri to watch over the rest of the boys. But Iris interrupts her, trying to stop her. She says that this decision was made by Igni himself, so he went with the girls and did not stay with the boys. Then Iris, holding back with all her might, adds that the hero did not go with just anyone but with the saint herself. Although the girl does not know the full scale of that demonic filth, she is sure one cannot behave like that. But Iris suddenly cuts off Alicia. She asks Iris to calm down. She thinks the hero is just a fool. The girl suggests that he probably did not think before going with them, and then will pretend as if no one asked him anything. Iris starts shouting that she is absolutely serious, and Alicia replies that she is not joking either. Lily just steps aside and watches everything. Yuri begins to quietly giggle. Iris notices this and asks if he will go there too, but as soon as the man stops laughing, he apologizes. Yuri says that he felt. Alicia described Igni perfectly, and he thinks that she trusts him 100. The girl does not agree with him on everything, but still decides not to object. Iris is very surprised by this, and wide-eyed asks them again. Then she rushes to prove she also truly believes in the hero, because after all, he is Igni. Alicia covers her ears and tells the girl that she does not need to shout. Lily summarizes that they are quite friendly, and Edward replies, yes, actually, they are. He explains that they all became friends only thanks to Igni. Alicia suddenly grabs a broom, announces that she will return very soon and bring the hero with her, and the guys only manage to watch her leave. By that time, the carriage had already driven a short distance from the city. Inside, Rose continues to hug him, and at the same time rejoices that they are together again. Clara notices that the saint is in a good mood, and Rose replies, that's normal, and asks how she could be sad when Ian is nearby. She says that the hero is her destiny, but this shocks him, and he decides to take a closer look. Then he awkwardly and cautiously smiles, and suggests that everyone choose their own path, hoping that they do not make a mistake. Then Rose clenches her hands, and bursts with delight. Sparks appear in her eyes. She starts shaking the hero from side to side, asks Clara to look at him. Rose asks, isn't Ian a beauty? Clara replies that now she is even more convinced the girl really loves Ian. Then she turns to him and says that he speaks the right words, but the fate of the saint is truly predetermined. Then the hero asks the question, does Rose do this of her own free will? And Clara replies that this is not the case at all. Clara says that holy magic, the strongest form of water magic, does not appear so easily. The elf says that moreover Rose is a saint of S rank, standing, leaning her shoulder against him. Clara says that there is a belief. God himself gave her this power, so her fate is predetermined, and Rose is obliged to strictly follow it throughout her entire life. The hero is surprised that this extends throughout his whole life, and the girl confirms it once again. Then Ian asks if Rose agrees that it will be so, and she answers, yes, because it is her fate. After that, she adds that she must help people. The hero understands. From the very day he was expelled, Rose has been alone all the time. Suddenly, the girl wants to say something else. Rose says that this means Igni will stay with her forever, and she is very happy about this. He is very surprised and asks if it is really true that to complete this task, he will need his whole life. The girl is touched by this and says that she would never force him. That is why she was so happy when he personally agreed to go with them. Then Igni finally realizes what exactly he has got himself into. Suddenly he is gnawed by the thought, why then did they not ask him? Then the hero suddenly realizes one thing. He thinks about how Rose dedicated her entire life to cleansing the world of dirt, sacrificing everything dear to her, and that throughout all this time, she only needed Igni, one she could rely on. Then he thinks maybe it really is worth continuing the journey together with Rose, but even that does not fully satisfy him. Suddenly the carriage shudders, and the hero asks what is happening. Rose says she knew. They would interrupt while Alicia was making a circle around the carriage. Igni looks outside and recognizes the girl flying on a broom. He is terribly surprised and asks where she came from. In response, Alicia says she came to save him. She flies closer and adds that although Ian is strong enough to escape, knowing him, she expects even more mischief from him. Suddenly, their conversation is interrupted by Rose. She yells at her not to dare come so close to the hero. The saint places magical shackles on Alicia. She is struck by such power. Rose says she understands. No one can resist the charm of Ian and calls him a dear. But then the saint adds that only she should become his bride and decides to erase Alicia's memories. At that moment, the hero stops her, grabbing her by the hand. The young man explains that Alicia is just his dear friend. But Rose says that is not proper and asks him to step back, otherwise she won't be able to erase the memories. Igni realizes that the girl is not listening to him at all, and he feels a thirst for Clara's blood. He recalls, the demonic lands are very close, and he has an enhancement ring. Then the hero decides he can definitely do this. He uses Big Bang. After that, he notices that, it seems, time has stopped. Then the hero stands before Rose and asks her to listen to him. He tells her that he will not go with them. This overwhelms her with a wave of anger. Igni insists that he has friends he cannot abandon. But the girl suddenly asks if he really only misses her, saying that fate binds them. In this case, the hero creates a fireball in his hand. Rosie sees this and grimaces. It spins in her head. Could it be that her Een no longer exists? But still, after a few seconds, she finally opens her eyes and sees a hand stretched out before her. Igni asks her to take this flame instead of him and extends it to her. The girl fulfills his request and brings fire to him, admiring the warmth and tenderness of the flame.